Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Temperance Judith Ravencroft, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years now. People always ask about my first name. It's one of those old virtue names, like hope or faith. My grandmother picked it, said it meant knowing when to stop. I should have listened to her wisdom. I work the Tennessee side, mostly around Cataract Falls and the old homestead areas where families lived before the park was established. My job is cultural history and botanical surveys, fancy words for hiking around abandoned farms and writing down what plants still grow there. I have a PhD in anthropology, but I traded my desk for hiking boots in 1973. Best decision I ever made, or so I thought. The mountains hold secrets in every hollow and ridge. Families lived here for generations before the government bought them out in the 1932. Scots-Irish settlers, Cherokee who stayed after the removal, and later folks just trying to make a living from tough land. They all left traces, stone foundations, fruit trees gone wild, family graveyards hidden in the woods. What really fascinated me was the medicine. Mountain people knew plants like city folks know street signs. They had remedies for everything. Willow bark for pain, foxglove for the heart, ginseng for strength. The old women, they called them granny women, passed down healing knowledge through generations. Of course, some folks called it witchcraft instead of medicine, especially when times got hard and people needed someone to blame. I always treated the rootwork stories as folklore, academic curiosity, nothing more. Plants are plants, I told myself. Chemistry and botany, not magic. The old mountain saying, every plant has its purpose, and every purpose has its plant, seemed like primitive science to me. Simple people making sense of their world the best they could. That September morning in 1985 started like any other. Early mist hung in the valleys, and the air smelled of changing leaves and wild herbs. I was heading to document an abandoned homestead near Cataract Falls, one that hadn't been surveyed since the 1942. The trail wasn't marked, hadn't been used in decades. Only rangers with GPS units could find places like this anymore. My backpack held the usual gear: plant specimen containers, field microscope, soil testing kit, camera, and my grandmother's old botany guide. She'd been an herb woman herself, though she never called it that. Just someone who knew which plants helped and which ones hurt. The walk took 3 hours through thick woods. Rhododendron grew so dense I had to crawl through tunnels in some places. When I finally reached the homestead clearing, my breath caught. After 40 years of abandonment, most old places looked like the forest was swallowing them. This one was different. The cabin was gone, just a stone chimney and foundation left. But the garden was perfect. Too perfect. Rows of herbs grew in neat lines like someone had planted them yesterday. Foxglove, elderberry, bloodroot, wild ginseng, yarrow, boneset. Plants that should have been scattered or dead were thriving in organized patches. I checked my map twice. No mistake. This place had been empty since the 1942. No roads led here, no power lines, no water except the spring that fed into Cataract Creek. Yet someone, or something, was maintaining a garden that required daily care. The wrongness of it made my skin crawl, but I had a job to do. I started with photographs, documenting each plant species and their unnatural arrangement. That's when I noticed my camera acting up. The lens would focus fine on trees and rocks, but every time I pointed it at the herb garden, it went fuzzy. The photos came out blurred, like something was moving too fast to capture. I tried to tell myself it was equipment failure, but the feeling in that place was getting stronger. Too quiet. Forest sounds, birds, insects, wind through leaves. All muffled like the world was holding its breath. The herbs smelled too strong, overwhelming my nose with scents that shouldn't mix. Mint and mugwort, sage and Solomon's seal, creating combinations that made my head swim. Still, I collected specimens, small samples from each plant, careful to take only what I needed. That's what the protocol said, and I'd been following protocols for 12 years without problems. I labeled each container, noted GPS coordinates, tested soil pH levels, everything scientific and proper. But when I reached for a sprig of what looked like white sage, something felt wrong. The plant was warm, like it had fever. The leaves moved against my fingers even though no wind stirred them. For just a moment, I could have sworn I heard humming, an old woman's voice singing some wordless tune. I jerked my hand back, and the sound stopped. Just forest silence again, thick and waiting. That's when I saw the grave. The grave sat at the edge of the herb garden, hidden by a massive elderberry bush until I moved around to get a better camera angle. Fresh dirt. Someone had been digging here recently, but the headstone was older than anything I'd seen in these mountains. The carved letters were worn but readable. Opal Whitethorn, Root Woman, 1,789 to 1,847. They called it witchcraft. My hands shook as I photographed the marker. Root Woman. That was what mountain people called their healers. But this grave was wrong in every way that mattered. First, it wasn't in any official cemetery. Second, the burial permit database had no record of recent activity in this area. Third, that fresh dirt meant someone had been here within days, maybe hours. I knelt and touched the soil. Still soft, still rich with the smell of turned earth. Whatever had happened here was recent enough that morning dew hadn't hardened the surface. But who could have reached this place? The trail I'd followed was overgrown and unmarked. It would take GPS coordinates and serious hiking skills just to find this clearing. The wrongness was getting stronger. Plants around the grave moved without wind, like they were breathing. The elderberry bush had berries and blossoms at the same time, which was impossible. Spring flowers don't bloom during autumn harvest. The seasons don't mix like that in nature. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming to pack up and get out. But I'm a scientist, and scientists need evidence. I needed to understand what was happening here, needed to document it properly. My job was to preserve mountain history, and this place was definitely part of that history. I started collecting soil samples near the grave. That's when I found the first personal item. A carved bone button, old-fashioned but clean as if someone had polished it yesterday. Then a piece of brown pottery, handmade with the kind of glazing they used in the 1800s. These things should have been buried deep or rotted away, not sitting on top of fresh dirt. My specimen bags started developing holes. Small tears that hadn't been there when I packed them. The holes appeared while I watched, like invisible teeth were chewing through the plastic. I lost 3 plant samples before I switched to glass containers. That's when I heard the humming again. This time it was clearer, definitely a woman's voice singing something that sounded like a lullaby. The melody was old, older than any song I knew, with words in a language that might have been Cherokee mixed with Scots. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like the plants themselves were singing. I stood up fast and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The singing stopped. Forest silence pressed down like a weight. But I could feel eyes watching me, studying me. Something that knew I didn't belong here. Something that was deciding what to do about it. I backed toward my equipment, trying to look calm, while my heart hammered against my ribs. That's when I saw her. Just for a second, at the edge of the clearing where the woods got thick. An old woman in clothes that looked like they were woven from plant fibers. Her hair was white as bone-set flowers, and her hands were stained green, like she'd been working with herbs for so long the plants had claimed her. She watched me for maybe 3 seconds, then melted back into the forest like mist. But those eyes, deep and green as old forest pools, burned into my memory. Eyes that had seen generations pass. Eyes that knew secrets the modern world had forgotten. I packed up fast, hands shaking so bad I could barely seal the specimen containers. The few samples I'd managed to collect went into my backpack along with the camera and soil testing kit. I needed to get back to the ranger station, needed to research this place properly, needed to talk to someone who might understand what I'd found. The hike back took forever. Every shadow looked like the old woman. Every rustling leaf sounded like footsteps. The forest felt like it was following me, watching me leave with its treasures. Twice I heard that humming behind me, always just out of sight. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was setting and my nerves were shot. I drove straight to the ranger station and called William Hartley, the park historian. If anyone could make sense of what I'd found, it would be Bill. He'd been studying mountain families and their traditions for 20 years. Bill, I need you to look up a name for me. Opal Whitethorn, died 1847. Called herself a root woman. Whitethorn, that rings a bell. Give me an hour with the archives. While I waited, I tried to examine my plant specimens under the lab microscope, but every sample had changed. The white sage was black as charcoal. The elderberries had shriveled into tiny raisins, the bloodroot had turned the color of actual blood and was warm to the touch. Plants don't just change like that. Not in a few hours. Not ever. Bill called back with information that made my skin crawl. Found her in the Cherokee County records. Opal Whitethorn. Tried for witchcraft in 1847 and executed. But here's the interesting part. She wasn't actually practicing witchcraft. She was a healer who worked with Cherokee medicine women during a smallpox epidemic. Saved dozens of children, both white and Cherokee. Some folks didn't like her crossing racial lines. What happened to her? Hanged for consorting with the devil. Case was built on testimony from families who lost children to the epidemic. They needed someone to blame, and a woman who worked with Indian medicine was an easy target. I stared at my ruined specimens. Bill, what do you know about her burial site? That's the strange part. She was supposed to be buried in the potter's field, but the body disappeared from the jail before the execution. Some say her Cherokee friends took it for proper burial. Others claim she used root magic to escape the hanging. Mountain folklore's full of stories about her ghost still gathering herbs in the old places. After Bill hung up, I sat alone in the lab trying to make sense of what I'd found. An executed healer's grave in the middle of nowhere. A perfect herb garden with no caretaker, plants that changed after being collected, and an old woman who might or might not exist. The rational part of my mind said there had to be logical explanations. Maybe some old-timer was secretly maintaining the garden. Maybe my specimens had been contaminated by something I'd missed. Maybe stress and isolation had made me see things that weren't there. But the burned specimens on my lab table said otherwise. And deep down, I knew I'd disturbed something that should have been left alone. I couldn't stop thinking about that place. For 3 days, I tried to focus on other work, routine surveys, paperwork, anything to keep my mind busy. But the herb garden haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those perfect rows of plants and felt those green eyes watching from the woods. The specimens I'd collected were getting worse. The blackened sage had started growing. Actually growing in its sealed container. Tiny root tendrils pressed against the glass like fingers trying to get out. The bloodroot had begun to smell like iron and earth, so strong I had to move it to the storage shed. Bill called Thursday morning with more bad news. I've been digging deeper into the Whitethorn case. Turns out 3 people involved in her trial died within a month of the execution. Natural causes, they said, but all of them got sick after eating wild plants. Plants they'd been eating safely for years. What kind of plants? Pokeweed, mostly. Some wild onions, few others. Normal mountain food, but somehow it turned toxic. Like the plants themselves were angry. I knew I had to go back. Not just curiosity anymore. Something was pulling me there, like invisible strings attached to my chest. I tried to tell myself it was scientific interest, but the truth was simpler and scarier. The root woman wanted me to return. This time I brought backup. Bill agreed to come with me, partly for research and partly because he was worried about me going alone. You've been acting strange since that first trip, he said. Like something's got hold of you. He wasn't wrong. I'd been having dreams about the herb garden, dreams where I walked the rows of plants and understood their purposes without thinking. Dreams where an old woman with green-stained hands taught me which roots healed and which ones killed. Dreams that felt more like memories. We started early Friday morning, following the same overgrown trail. Bill brought his own camera and a voice recorder for oral history work. I carried fresh specimen containers and a soil analysis kit, plus samples of the plants that had changed in my lab. The forest felt different this time, more alive, more aware. Birds followed us through the trees, calling to each other in patterns that sounded almost like language. Squirrels ran ahead of us down the trail, like they were announcing our arrival. The very air seemed thicker, charged with energy that made my skin tingle. You feel that? Bill asked about halfway to the clearing. Feel what? Like we're being watched? Studied. I'd felt it since we left the truck, but hearing Bill say it made it worse. If a skeptical historian was picking up on the wrongness here, then it wasn't just my imagination. The herb garden looked exactly the same. Perfect rows, impossible seasonal mixing, plants too healthy for a wild place. But this time, there were signs of recent activity. A wooden bowl sat beside the spring, carved from single piece of hickory. Fresh herbs lay scattered around the grave. Offerings, maybe, or ingredients, for something I didn't want to think about. Bill started photographing the headstone while I knelt beside the spring. The water was crystal clear and cold as mountain ice. It should have tasted like any spring water, clean and mineral-rich. Instead, it tasted like herbs, bitter and complex, like drinking a handful of different medicines at once. Temperance, you need to see this. Bill was standing over the grave, pointing at the fresh dirt. Something was growing there, pushing up through the soil like fast-forwarded film. Green shoots that hadn't been there minutes ago, reaching toward the afternoon sun. As we watched, the shoots became stems, then leaves, then flowering tops. In less than 10 minutes, a full patch of herbs had sprouted from Opal Whitethorn's grave. Plants I recognized: blood-red trillium, wild ginseng, ghostly white baneberry. Plants that shouldn't grow together, shouldn't bloom in autumn, shouldn't grow that fast under any conditions. "This isn't possible," Bill whispered. That's when the humming started. This time it was louder, clearer, definitely coming from the elderberry bush beside the grave. The melody was the same lullaby I'd heard before, but now I could make out some words. Cherokee syllables mixed with mountain dialect, singing about plants and healing and the debt owed to the dead. Bill grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But I couldn't move. The song was pulling at something deep in my chest, some knowledge I'd inherited from my grandmother without knowing it. The words meant something, told a story about a woman who'd given her life to save children and been murdered for it. A woman whose healing knowledge had died with her, lost to fear and ignorance. The elderberry bush rustled, and she stepped out. Opal Whitethorn looked exactly like I'd seen her before. Ancient but strong, dressed in clothes that seemed woven from the forest itself. Her white hair was braided with herbs and small bones. Her hands were stained green to the wrists, and her eyes held the deep wisdom of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning which plants heal and which ones kill. Bill made a choking sound and stumbled backward. The old woman looked at him for a long moment, then turned her attention to me. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through dry leaves. "You took my medicines, child, took them without asking, without understanding. Now you carry debt that must be paid." "I'm sorry," I managed. "I didn't know." "Course you didn't know. Nobody knows anymore. All the old learning died with the old women, and the new world calls it superstition." She moved closer, and I smelled earth and growing things, life and death mixed together. "But you have the gift sleeping in your blood. I can smell it on you." "What gift?" "Plant knowledge, healing hands. Your grandmother had it, passed it down even though she never spoke of it. You could learn, if you're willing." Bill was backing toward the trail, camera forgotten, face white with terror. "Temperance, come on." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Something about the old woman's presence felt right, like coming home to a place I'd never seen before. "What do you want from me?" "Justice," Opal said. "And preservation. My knowledge dies with me unless someone learns it proper. All the healing I could teach, all the good I could do through another's hands. Will you learn, child? Will you carry the debt forward?" Before I could answer, Bill screamed. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, but something was wrong with his face. His skin was turning gray, and his lips were swelling. He clawed at his throat, making awful choking sounds. "What did you do to him?" I demanded. Opal looked sad but not surprised. "Nothing, child. He did it to himself. Picked berries from my elderberry while you were listening. Sweet berries, harmless most times. But not when they're grown with anger and tended with sorrow. Help him. Could be done. Will you learn? Will you carry my knowledge forward and use it proper?" Bill collapsed, still clawing at his throat. Foam bubbled from his mouth, and his eyes rolled back until only whites showed. I could save him. I knew Opal could save him, but only if I agreed to something I didn't understand. "Yes," I said. "I'll learn. Just help him." Opal nodded and moved to where Bill was convulsing. She knelt beside him and placed one green-stained hand on his forehead. Her lips moved in silent words, and gradually his breathing eased. The gray color faded from his skin, and the swelling went down. "He'll live," she said, "but he won't remember. Men like him, they can't hold the knowing. It would break their minds." When Bill opened his eyes, confusion replaced terror. "What happened? Why am I on the ground?" "You tripped," I lied. "Hit your head on a rock." As we helped him to his feet, Opal faded back into the forest like smoke. But her voice followed us as we left the clearing. "Come back when the moon is dark, child. Come alone. Your learning begins then." I returned 3 nights later when the moon was just a sliver in the sky. Bill didn't remember anything after arriving at the clearing, and I didn't tell him the truth. How could I explain that I'd made a deal with a ghost to save his life? How could I make him understand that some debts can only be paid in knowledge? The forest at night was completely different. Sounds that should have been threatening, owl calls, branch snaps, rustling leaves, felt welcoming instead, like the woods were guiding me home. Fireflies blinked between the trees, but their light was wrong. Too blue, too steady, arranged in patterns that spelled out directions I somehow understood. Opal was waiting in the herb garden, sitting cross-legged beside her grave. The plants around her glowed with soft silver light, and I could see every leaf and flower clearly despite the darkness. She'd laid out herbs on a piece of deerskin, dried roots, powdered bark, leaves that still looked fresh, though some had been picked generations ago. "Sit, child," she said. "Your real education begins now." I sat across from her, and she began to teach. Not with words at first, but by placing my hands on different plants and letting their purpose flow into me. Willow bark for pain, but only when harvested under a waning moon. Wild ginger for nausea, but the root had to be thanked before taking. Each plant had not just chemical properties, but spirit, personality, will of its own. "The new learning treats plants like they're dead things," Opal said. "Cut them up, boil them down, make pills from their pieces. But plants are living beings with their own medicine spirits. You work with them, not against them." She showed me how to listen to what plants needed, how to ask permission before harvesting, how to give back to the earth what you took from it. My grandmother's old knowledge came flooding back, memories I didn't know I had, passed down through blood and bone. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you disturbed my rest, and because you have the gift. But mostly because the old knowledge is dying. Mountain women used to pass healing traditions mother to daughter for generations. Now they're all gone, and their wisdom is buried with them. What happened to you?" "Really?" Opal's face grew hard. "Smallpox came to the Cherokee children in the summer of 1847. White doctors wouldn't treat them, said it was God's will that the Indian children die. So, I worked with the Cherokee medicine women, sharing plant knowledge, saving who we could." She picked up a piece of white root, turned it over in her stained fingers. "Saved 43 children that summer, 43 little ones who would have died without the old medicine. But some white folks didn't like seeing their children saved by Indian witch magic. Called me devil's servant, said I was poisoning good Christian souls. But you were helping. Didn't matter. Fear makes people stupid, and stupid people need someone to blame. They tried me for witchcraft, but I wasn't going to hang for doing good. Cherokee friends helped me fake my death and escape to the mountains. Lived here another 30 years, teaching anyone willing to learn. Then how are you?" "I died natural in 1877, and the plants brought me back. Not alive, exactly, but not gone either. The medicine spirits needed someone to guard the old knowledge, keep it safe until the right person came along." The teaching continued through the night. Opal showed me which mushrooms could cure infection and which ones caused visions. She taught me to read illnesses in the smell of someone's breath, to feel broken bones through my palms, to mix poultices that would draw poison from wounds. But with every lesson came a warning. This knowledge can heal or harm, child. Same plant that saves a life can take one if used wrong. That's why the old women were so careful about who they taught. What about Bill? Why did the berries poison him? Your friend mocked the old ways, called them primitive superstitions, while standing on my grave. The plants don't forgive insults like that. Her eyes grew sad. I saved him because you asked, but he'll never understand. Men like him think they can take whatever they want from the earth without consequence. As dawn approached, I felt the weight of what I was learning. This wasn't just botany or folk medicine. It was a complete way of seeing the world. Plants weren't resources to be harvested, but partners to work with. Healing wasn't about fighting disease, but restoring balance. And knowledge came with responsibility that never ended. "Last lesson, child," Opal said as the sky began to lighten. "The most important one." She picked up a handful of soil from her grave and pressed it into my palms. The dirt was warm, almost alive, and I felt power flowing through it. Plant spirits, earth energy, the accumulated wisdom of generations of healers. This is how you'll know true healing from false. Hold the earth while you work, and it will tell you what's needed. But remember, every time you use this gift, you take on part of the patient's pain. Heal too much without rest, and it will break you. The soil dissolved into my skin, leaving my palms stained green like hers. I could feel the change happening, my senses sharpening, plant knowledge awakening, the forest coming alive around me in ways I'd never imagined. "The debt is paid," Opal said. "You have my knowledge now, and the responsibility that comes with it. Use it well, child. The plants are watching." As the first rays of sunlight touched the clearing, she began to fade. "Will I see you again? When your time comes to pass the knowledge on, I'll be here. Until then, the plants will guide you." She was gone, leaving only the herb garden and the weight of centuries pressing down on my newly awakened understanding. That was 40 years ago, and I've carried Opal's knowledge every day since. I never left the mountains, though my job changed from documenting the past to preserving the living traditions. I found the last old mountain women, the ones who still remembered pieces of plant lore their grandmothers taught them, and convinced them to share what they knew. Bill never remembered what really happened that day. As far as he knows, he had an allergic reaction to something, and I got him medical help. He wrote his reports about the Whitethorn case, filed them in the archives, and moved on to other historical mysteries. Sometimes I think that's a mercy. Some knowledge is too heavy for minds that aren't ready to carry it. I built a cabin near the old clearing, close enough to tend Opal's garden, but far enough away to respect her rest. The Park Service thinks I'm just an eccentric old ranger who likes her solitude. They don't know about the people who come to me in the deep woods. Hikers with infections that won't heal, locals with ailments that doctors can't cure, sometimes even doctors themselves when modern medicine reaches its limits. I've trained 6 women over the years, mountain women mostly, with grandmother knowledge sleeping in their blood. I taught them the same way Opal taught me, hands in the soil, listening to plant spirits, understanding that healing is about balance, not conquest. 5 of them are scattered through Appalachia now, keeping the old knowledge alive in their own communities. The 6th is my granddaughter Sarah, who just finished her botany degree and thinks she knows everything about plants. She'll learn, just like I did. The gift skips generations sometimes, but it always comes back. Blood calls to blood, and the plants are patient teachers. Opal's garden still blooms every season, tended by hands that aren't quite alive but aren't quite dead either. Occasionally, I glimpse her working among the herbs, always at dawn or dusk, always fading when I try to look directly. She keeps her promise to watch over the knowledge and guide those who use it properly. The forest has forgiven me for that first disturbed collection, but I've never forgotten the lesson. Everything has a price, and some debts can only be paid in service to others. I've spent 4 decades carrying that debt forward, healing when I can, teaching when I should, always remembering that knowledge without wisdom is just another way to cause harm. Sometimes young researchers come through these mountains, armed with degrees and equipment, looking to document folk medicine practices for their studies. They remind me of myself at 34, so certain that science could explain everything. I don't try to convince them otherwise. Like Opal said, some people aren't ready for the real knowledge. They have to disturb the right grave first, make their own deal with the spirits that guard the old ways. But I watch them, and I wait, because the plants are always watching too, deciding who might be worthy of their secrets. And when the right person comes along, someone with plant gift in their blood and respect in their heart, the earth will call them home just like it called me. The root woman's curse wasn't a curse at all, I learned. It was an invitation, a chance to become part of something older and deeper than the modern world understands. A chance to carry forward the healing traditions that connected generations of mountain women to the living spirit of the land itself. My time is growing short now. These old bones feel winter coming early this year, and the plants whisper that my granddaughter will soon be ready for her first real lesson. When the time comes, I'll take her to the clearing where Opal waits. I'll watch her place her hands in the earth and feel the gift awakening. I'll see the understanding dawn in her eyes when she realizes that some knowledge can only be learned on your knees in the dirt, listening to teachers who died before you were born. And maybe, if I've carried the debt well enough, I'll earn my own rest beside the herb garden. Maybe I'll join the watchers who guard the old knowledge, waiting for the next disturbed soul who needs to learn that the earth remembers everything, forgives little, but rewards those willing to serve the greater healing with wisdom that spans generations. The mountains keep their secrets well, but they share them with those who prove themselves worthy. All you have to do is listen to what the plants are trying to tell you, and be ready to pay whatever price the earth demands for its ancient gifts. Some debts are worth carrying for a lifetime. Some teachers never really leave, as long as someone remembers their lessons. And some gardens bloom eternal, tended by hands that understand the true meaning of root work. Not magic, but medicine. Not witchcraft, but wisdom. Not death, but transformation into something that serves the living long after the body returns to earth. The Root Woman's garden still grows, and always will. My name is Josiah Ezekiel Mountainspire, and I've been a park ranger in these Blue Ridge Mountains for 19 years. I know every trail, every cave, and every holler from here to the Tennessee line. My granddaddy walked these ridges, and his daddy before him. The mountains are in my blood. I work the George Washington National Forest, mostly around Copper Ridge Wilderness. It's rough country, steep rocks, thick woods, and old mines that go back more than 100 years. Most folks stay on the marked trails, but I go everywhere. Cave rescues, lost hikers, medical emergencies. If someone gets in trouble in the backcountry, they call me. The locals have always told stories about these mountains. My grandmother used to sit on her porch and talk about spirits in the hollers, about voices that called your name when nobody was there. She had a special fear of something she called the Hollerin' Woman, a ghost who lived in the old copper mines and stole children away. I never believed those tales. Not until October of 1981. That's when 3 kids from Richmond went missing during a school field trip. It was peak fall season, the leaves burning red and gold on every ridge. The teachers had brought 30 kids to see the old mining area. Educational stuff. How people used to dig copper from these mountains. The hard life miners lived. The kids were excited, running around, taking pictures. Then Tommy Sullivan, age 8, just vanished. His teacher noticed first. One minute Tommy was looking at an old minecart. Next minute he was gone. They searched for an hour before calling us. Then 9-year-old Sarah Chen disappeared, while the adults were looking for Tommy. Finally, little Beth Morgan, only 7 years old, went missing too. 3 children, gone without a trace. I got the call at 4 p.m. on a Friday. October, weather in the mountains can turn deadly fast, and we had frost warnings coming. Kids that age wouldn't last one night outside if the temperature dropped. I grabbed my gear, rope, first aid kit, my old carbide lamp for cave work, and headed up Copper Ridge. My partner Jake was already there with the search dogs. Parents were crying, teachers were panicking. The whole scene felt wrong from the start. "Any tracks?" I asked Jake. He shook his head. Dogs picked up scent trails, going 3 different directions. Then they just stopped. Like the kids vanished into thin air. I've seen lost kids before. They usually follow water or take the easiest path. But 3 kids disappearing in 3 directions? That made no sense. The worst part was the silence. These mountains are always alive with sound, birds, squirrels, wind through the trees. But that day, everything was quiet, dead quiet. Even my radio crackled with static when it usually worked fine. We set up a search grid as the sun started going down. 20 volunteers, 3 bloodhounds, and me. I've done dozens of these searches. Usually, we find the person within a few hours. Kids especially. They get scared, they cry, they make noise. But not these 3. As darkness fell, we found the first strange thing. All 3 kids' backpacks, sitting in a perfect circle around the entrance to shaft number 7 to one of the deepest mines on Copper Ridge. The backpacks were placed neat and careful, like someone had arranged them special. "Kids didn't do this," Jake said, shining his flashlight on the circle. I had to agree. The arrangement was too perfect, too deliberate. But who else could have done it? We were miles from the nearest road. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound echoing up from deep in the mine. Low and mournful, like a woman crying for something lost. The sound made my skin crawl and my teeth ache. "You hear that?" I asked Jake. He tilted his head, listening. "Hear what?" But I heard it clear as day. A woman's voice, hollow and broken, calling out from somewhere deep underground. The next morning brought more searchers and more questions. State police, FBI, news crews. Everyone wanted to know how 3 kids could just disappear. I didn't tell them about the crying voice. They'd think I was crazy. But the weirdness kept getting worse. My flashlight died 3 times near the mine entrance, even with fresh batteries. My compass spun like a pinwheel instead of pointing north. The temperature around shaft number 7 was 20 degrees colder than anywhere else on the ridge. Worst of all, the search dogs wouldn't go near the mines. These were trained rescue dogs, used to following scents into caves and rough country. But when I tried to lead them to the mine entrance, they whimpered and backed away. "Something spooked them bad," said their handler, a woman named Carol who'd worked with these dogs for 10 years. "I've never seen them act like this." Around noon, I found the first handprints. They were in the dust just inside shaft number 7, small handprints, the right size for children. They led deeper into the tunnel, past where my flashlight beam could reach. But here's what made my blood run cold. There were way more than 6 handprints. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pressed into the mine floor like kids had been crawling through that tunnel for years. I called Jake over to look. "Jesus," he whispered, "how long have those been there?" I couldn't answer that. The mines had been sealed for safety since 1962, the year I started as a ranger. Nobody should have been in there, especially not children. But I had to follow the prints. Those 3 kids were somewhere in this mountain, and time was running out. I strapped on my helmet, checked my rope, and started into shaft number 7. The tunnel went deeper than I expected. My map showed it should stop after 200 feet, but I walked 300, 400 feet into the mountain. The handprints kept going, leading me down side passages I didn't know existed. That's when I heard her again. The crying woman, closer now. Her voice echoed off the tunnel walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded like she was right behind me. Sometimes it seemed to come from deep below my feet. And then she spoke words I could understand. "My children," the voice whispered. "Where are my children?" I stopped walking. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. In 19 years of cave work, I'd never heard anything like this. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." The crying stopped. For a moment, the tunnel was silent as a grave. Then I heard something that nearly made me run screaming from that mine. My daughter Emma's voice, calling for help. Emma, who had died 3 years ago in a climbing accident on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Emma, who was buried in Springdale Cemetery 50 miles away. Emma, who couldn't possibly be in this mine. "Daddy?" Her voice echoed through the darkness. "Daddy, I'm scared. Please help me." My legs went weak. I had to lean against the tunnel wall to keep from falling. It was her voice, exactly as I remembered it. Same tone, same accent, same little girl fear when she was truly frightened. "Emma?" I whispered. "I'm lost, Daddy. It's so dark here. Please come find me." I wanted to run toward that voice. Every father's instinct screamed at me to find my little girl, but the rational part of my mind knew this was impossible. Emma was dead. I'd carried her broken body off that mountain myself. This was something else, something that knew about my daughter and was using her voice to get me deeper into the mine. I backed away, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead of me. But as I retreated, I heard more voices. Tommy Sullivan calling for his mother, Sarah Chen asking for help, little Beth Morgan crying for someone to find her. The voices of the missing children, echoing from deeper in the mine. But underneath their cries, I heard something else. That woman's voice again, no longer crying. Now she was humming, a lullaby my own grandmother used to sing. "Rock-a-bye baby," in the treetop. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran through that tunnel like the devil himself was chasing me, not stopping until I burst out into daylight. Jake was waiting by the entrance. "Did you find anything?" he asked. I couldn't tell him what I'd heard. He'd think I was having a breakdown. Instead, I showed him the handprints, and told him about the deeper tunnels. "We need to get a team together," I said. "Those kids are somewhere in this mountain." But that night, Jake volunteered to explore the mine system himself. He was younger than me, a better climber. He thought he could find passages I might have missed. I should have stopped him. I should have told him about the voices, about the feeling of wrongness that filled those tunnels. But I was afraid he wouldn't believe me. Jake went into shaft number 7 at sunset. He never came out. We found Jake the next morning, but he wasn't the same man who'd gone into that mine. He was sitting just inside the tunnel entrance, staring at nothing. His hair had gone completely white overnight. His face was aged and lined like he'd lived 30 years in one night. When we tried to talk to him, he just whispered the same thing over and over. "She showed me her children. She showed me all her children." In his hand, he clutched a photograph. But it wasn't a picture from his wallet or his gear. It was an old daguerreotype, the kind they took in the 1800s. It showed 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, standing in front of a mine entrance. At the bottom, someone had written, "The Morgan Children, 1847. Jake wouldn't let go of that picture. When the ambulance took him away, he was still whispering about children in the dark. That's when I knew I was dealing with something beyond lost kids and underground tunnels. This was about the stories my grandmother used to tell, about the Halloran woman who lived in the copper mines. I went to the county library and looked up everything I could find about Copper Ridge. The mining records went back to 1838, when Irish immigrants first dug shafts into the mountain. The copper ore was rich, but the work was dangerous. Cave-ins were common, men died regularly. But it was the entry from October 1847 that made my blood run cold. Mine collapse in shaft, number 7, claimed 6 lives today. Among the dead was Sally Morgantown, age 34, who was searching the tunnels for her 5 missing children. The children, Patrick, 12, Michael, 10, Bridget, 8, Sean, 6, and little Mary, 4, had disappeared into the mine 3 days prior. Mrs. Morgantown refused to abandon her search, despite warnings of unstable ceiling supports. The collapse sealed both Sally and her children in the mountain forever. 5 children. The same 5 faces in Jake's photograph. Sally Morgantown, the Halloran woman of my grandmother's stories. She'd been searching for her lost children when the mine collapsed, and she'd been searching ever since. But now I understood something worse. She wasn't just searching anymore, she was collecting. Every time children went missing near Copper Ridge, it was Sally adding to her underground family. I had to get those 3 kids out of the mountain before she claimed them permanently. That night, I went back to shaft number 7 alone. I brought every piece of cave gear I owned, rope, extra lights, emergency food, even dynamite charges, in case I needed to blast through collapsed passages. The mine felt different this time. The air was thick and heavy, like breathing soup. My lights kept dimming for no reason, and everywhere I looked, I saw more handprints in the dust. Small prints, like children crawling through the darkness. I followed the prints deeper than I'd ever gone before. The main tunnel branched into smaller passages, and those branched again. Soon, I was in parts of the mine that weren't on any map. The ceiling was low, forcing me to crawl. The walls pressed in close on both sides. That's when I heard them, the children, somewhere ahead of me in the darkness. "Tommy?" I called out. "Sarah? Beth? This is Ranger Mountain Spire. I'm here to take you home. Help us," came Tommy's voice, weak and scared. "We can't find the way out." I crawled faster, following the sound. My rope was running out behind me, marking my path back to the entrance. The children's voices got clearer, closer, but something was wrong. Their voices were coming from different directions now. Tommy seemed to be ahead of me, Sarah to my left, Beth somewhere above me in a passage I couldn't see. How could they be separated in these narrow tunnels? Then I realized the horrible truth. The voices were moving, circling me, getting closer from all sides. "Tommy, is that really you?" The voice that answered wasn't Tommy's anymore. It was older, rougher. A voice that might have belonged to an Irish boy who died in these mines 130 years ago. "Come play with us, mister. Come play in the dark." That's when I saw her. Sally Morgantown stepped out of solid rock like it was made of water. 7 feet tall and thin as a rail, wearing a tattered dress that might have been blue once upon a time. Her hair hung in matted strings around a face that was more skull than flesh. Where her eyes should have been, there were just dark holes filled with glittering copper ore. "You've come for the children," she said, and her voice was like rocks grinding together. "But they're my children now. They'll never be hungry again. Never be cold, never grow old and die." Behind her came the others, dozens of children from different times, different decades. Some wore clothes from the 1800s, others from the 1920 seconds. The 1950 seconds. All of them had that same empty look in their eyes, like they'd forgotten who they used to be. And there, among Sally's collected children, I saw Tommy Sullivan, Sarah Chen, and Beth Morgan. They looked peaceful, happy even. But their eyes were as empty as all the rest. "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They have families who love them, parents who are worried sick." Sally's copper-filled eye sockets turned toward me. As I loved my children, as I worried when they were lost in the dark, but no one came for them. No one came for me. She was right, and I knew it. Back in 1847, 5 children had disappeared into this mountain, and their mother had died trying to find them. The mining company had sealed the entrance and moved on. Nobody had come to rescue Sally Morgantown's family. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I'm sorry no one came for you. I'm sorry you lost your children." For a moment, Sally's terrible face softened. Patrick was my eldest, so smart, always reading books. Michael loved to sing. Bridget could make anyone laugh. Sean was my brave boy, always protecting his little sister. And Mary. Her voice broke on the name. Mary was only 4. She was afraid of the dark. I couldn't let her stay afraid. I understood now. Sally hadn't been stealing children out of cruelty. She'd been trying to save them from the fear and loneliness she'd felt when her own children died. But that didn't mean I could let her keep Tommy, Sarah, and Beth. "Your children aren't lost anymore," I said carefully. "You found them. You've been together all these years. But these 3," I pointed to the Richmond kids. "Their parents are still alive, still searching, still afraid." Sally considered this. Around us, the dozens of collected children watched with their empty eyes. "You would take them from me? I would reunite them with their families. The same thing you tried to do in 1847. Sally Morgantown stared at me for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. "But first," she said, "you must remember." "Remember what?" I asked. "Their names," Sally whispered. "My children's names. For 134 years, no one has spoken their names. No one has remembered they existed." I thought about the library records, about Jake's photograph. Patrick, Michael, Bridget, Sean, and Mary. "Patrick Michael Morgantown," Sally corrected me. "Michael Sean Morgantown, Bridget Mary Morgantown. Sean Patrick Morgantown, Mary Bridget Morgantown." She wanted me to remember them as real people, not just names in an old mining report. Children who had lived and laughed and played before the mountain swallowed them. "I'll remember," I promised. "I'll make sure everyone remembers." Sally nodded and stepped aside. The collected children parted like water, creating a path toward Tommy, Sarah, and Beth. But as I moved toward them, something went wrong. The 3 Richmond children looked at me with those same empty eyes as all the rest. When I tried to take Tommy's hand, he pulled away. "We don't want to leave," Sarah said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Mother Sally takes care of us now." My heart sank. I was too late. Sally had already claimed them, made them part of her underground family. "Please," I begged. "Your real parents love you. They're waiting for you." "We had parents," Beth said, "but they let us get lost. Mother Sally would never let us get lost." Sally smiled, showing teeth like broken copper. "You see, they choose to stay. They are my children now." But I knew that wasn't true. These kids weren't choosing anything. They were under some kind of spell, their minds clouded by Sally's supernatural influence. I had one last desperate idea. I pulled out my wallet and showed them pictures. Tommy's school photo that his mother had given me, Sarah's family portrait, Beth's birthday party last year. "Look," I said. "Remember who you really are." For a moment, confusion flickered in their empty eyes. Tommy touched his own face, comparing it to the school photo. Sarah stared at the family portrait, like she was trying to remember something important. That's my mom," Beth whispered, looking at the birthday party picture. Sally let out a shriek that nearly shattered my eardrums. The sound echoed through the tunnels like breaking glass. "No, they are mine. I saved them from the dark." The copper ore in her eye sockets glowed like hot coals. The collected children began to move, surrounding me. Some still wore their burial clothes from decades past. Others looked fresh, like they'd been taken recently. I realized with horror that Sally had been doing this for over a century, taking children who wandered too close to her mountain, adding them to her family of the lost. But seeing those photos had broken her spell over the 3 Richmond kids. They were remembering their real lives, their real families. "We want to go home," Tommy said, his voice getting stronger. Sally screamed again and lunged at us. Her hands had grown into claws, her fingers sharp as mining picks. I grabbed all 3 children and ran. The tunnels had become a maze, passages that had been straight before now twisted and turned. Dead ends appeared where openings should have been. Sally was changing the mine itself, trapping us inside her underground kingdom. Behind us, I could hear her voice echoing through every tunnel at once. "My children, come back to Mother." We ran through narrow passages, stumbling in the darkness. My flashlight beam showed dozens of branching tunnels, all leading deeper into the mountain. I was completely lost. But then I remembered my rope. I'd been letting it out behind me as I went deeper into the mine. If I could find it, I could follow it back to the entrance. There, a glint of yellow rope in my flashlight beam. I grabbed it and started pulling us along its length, the children clinging to my belt. But Sally wasn't done with us yet. The tunnel walls began to shake. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling. She was going to collapse the mine, just like in 1847. If she couldn't keep us, she'd make sure we never left. "Hurry," I shouted, pulling the kids faster along the rope. Behind us, Sally's voice followed. "If I cannot have them, no one can. We will all be together in the dark." The shaking got worse. Bigger rocks started falling. I could see light ahead. The tunnel entrance, maybe 100 feet away. 50 feet. 20 feet. A huge chunk of ceiling crashed down right behind us, missing Sarah by inches. 10 feet to safety. That's when the rope snapped. A falling rock had cut through it, just feet from the entrance. We were trapped between Sally's fury and tons of collapsing mountain. "Run!" I yelled, pushing the children toward the light. Tommy made it out. Sarah stumbled, but rolled clear of the tunnel mouth. Beth was right behind her. But as I tried to follow, the entire entrance came down in an avalanche of rock and dirt. I was trapped inside with Sally and her collected children. In the sudden darkness, I heard her laughing. "Now you understand," Sally's voice whispered. "Now you know what it feels like to lose children you love." She was right. I'd saved the 3 Richmond kids, but I'd failed to save all the others. Decades worth of missing children who would stay lost forever in Sally's underground family. But maybe I could do one last thing for them. "Patrick Michael Morgantown," I said into the darkness. "Born 1835. He loved to read books." Sally's laughter stopped. "Michael Sean Morgantown," I continued. "Born 1837. He loved to sing." "Stop," Sally whispered. But I kept going. "Bridget Mary Morgantown, born 1839. She could make anyone laugh." "Sean Patrick Morgantown, born 1841. He was brave and protected his sister." "Mary Bridget Morgantown, born 1843. She was only 4 years old, and she was afraid of the dark." In the blackness around me, I heard something changing. The collected children were stirring, moving. Their empty eyes were beginning to show emotion again. Confusion, fear, and finally recognition of who they'd been before Sally claimed them. "You loved your children," I told Sally. "But keeping all these others won't bring yours back. Let them go home. Let them rest." For a long moment, the tunnel was silent. Then I heard Sally crying, not the terrible wailing from before, but the quiet sobs of a mother who had finally accepted her loss. "I just missed them so much," she whispered. "I know," I said. "I miss my daughter too. But keeping others won't heal that pain." The darkness around me began to lift. Not real light, but something warmer and softer. One by one, the collected children started to fade away, peaceful looks on their faces as they finally found rest. Last to go were Sally's own 5 children. They appeared as they had been in life. Healthy, happy, whole. Patrick and Michael, Bridget and Sean, and little Mary, who was no longer afraid. "Thank you, Mother," Patrick said, taking Sally's hand. "But it's time to come home now." Sally looked at me one last time. The copper ore was gone from her eyes, replaced by the tired but loving gaze of a mother who had carried pain for too long. "Remember them," she said. "Promise me you'll remember all their names." "I promise," I said. Then Sally Morgantown and her children walked into the light together, and they were gone. The rescue team found me 3 days later, barely alive but unharmed. The tunnel entrance had collapsed completely, but somehow I was lying in a natural cave about 50 feet away. A cave that hadn't been there before, according to all the maps. Tommy Sullivan, Sarah Chen, and Beth Morgan were found safe at the same spot. They were hungry and scared, but otherwise fine. When asked where they'd been for 4 days, they all told the same story. A nice lady in an old dress had kept them safe in a warm cave, singing lullabies until the ranger came to take them home. The doctors said they must have been in shock. Trauma sometimes makes people remember things differently than they really happened. But I know what I experienced in that mine. Jake recovered, mostly. His hair stayed white, and he never talked much about what he'd seen in the tunnels. But sometimes he'd look at old photographs and nod, like he was recognizing faces from long ago. He retired early and moved to Florida. Said the mountains felt too crowded with memories. I stayed on as a ranger. These mountains are still my home, and now I have a job that goes beyond normal park duties. I keep records of everyone who's ever gone missing near Copper Ridge. I research their names, their families, their stories. I make sure they're remembered. In the county library, there's now a memorial plaque that reads, "In memory of the Morgantown family, Patrick, Michael, Bridget, Sean, Mary, and their mother Sally, who were lost in the Copper Ridge mine disaster of October 1847, and in memory of all the others who disappeared in these mountains over the years. They are not forgotten." I put that plaque there myself, with help from the Historical Society. Every year on Halloween, people leave flowers and toys by the old mine entrance. Not because I told them to, but because the story spread. People understood that this mountain held pain, and that sometimes the only way to heal old wounds is to acknowledge them. The 3 Richmond children grew up normal and healthy. Tommy became a teacher, Sarah went to medical school, Beth writes children's books. They don't remember much about their time in the mountain, which is probably for the best. But sometimes they send me letters. They all say the same thing, that they still dream about a sad woman singing lullabies, and that in those dreams, she seems peaceful now. I still patrol Copper Ridge regularly. The mines are quiet these days. Birds sing in the trees again. The temperature is normal. My compass points north like it should. But once in a while, usually in October, when the leaves are turning, I'll hear something that makes me stop and listen. Not the terrible wailing of the Hullerin woman, but something softer. Children laughing. A mother's voice calling them home for supper. Happy sounds, the kind that should echo through these mountains. The sounds of a family finally at peace. And I smile because I kept my promise. I remembered their names, asterisk. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Been 19 years since those 3 kids went missing, and not one child has disappeared from Copper Ridge since then. The mountain feels different now, lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted, asterisk, asterisk. Some folks say it was just a tragedy with a lucky ending. Lost kids, unstable tunnels, coincidence, and imagination filling in the gaps. Maybe they're right. Asterisk, asterisk, but I know what I experienced down there. I know what I saw, and I know that sometimes the dead just need someone to remember their names. Asterisk, asterisk. If you ever find yourself hiking near Copper Ridge, take a moment to read that memorial plaque. Say the names out loud: Patrick, Michael, Bridget, Sean, and Mary Morgantown. Let them know they haven't been forgotten. Asterisk, asterisk. Because in these old mountains, being remembered might be the most important thing of all. My name is Obedia Carter Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 15 years. That's 15 years of dealing with illegal campers, lost hikers, and the occasional moonshine operation hidden back in these Kentucky hollers. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. Growing up in a coal mining family, I learned early that the mountains keep their secrets. My daddy worked the mines until black lung took him, and I swore I'd find a different way to make a living in these hills. The Marines taught me discipline, and when I came back home in 1967, the Park Service seemed like a perfect fit. I knew these woods like the back of my hand, could climb the sandstone cliffs better than most, and had enough experience with mountain folk to handle the occasional bootlegger with respect. But I never believed the old stories. Every holler has its tales: spirits in the mist, devils making deals, Cherokee fire spirits dancing in the gorges. I figured they were just stories to keep folks away from dangerous places or illegal operations. August 1982 was the worst drought I'd ever seen. The creek beds were showing white stone for the first time in memory, and the Forest Service had us all on high alert for fires. Every day, I'd patrol the Red River Gorge area, checking for illegal campfires or signs of trouble. The heat made everything brittle and mean. That's when the reports started coming in. Hikers were seeing strange blue lights deep in Panther Creek Gorge, a place so remote you needed climbing gear just to get down into it. The gorge was a natural fortress of 200-foot sandstone walls, carved out over millions of years into a maze of arches, caves, and hidden springs. During Prohibition, it had been perfect country for moonshiners. Too hard to reach for most law enforcement, plenty of fresh water, and natural shelters for equipment. But the drought had folks spooked. Blue flames dancing in the distance, they said. The smell of corn mash and sulfur carried on the wind. Old-timers in town started talking about the devil's still again, a story I'd heard all my life but never paid much mind to. According to the tale, sometime in the 1920 seconds, a moonshiner named Jeremiah Panther had found the perfect spot in the gorge. He'd made some kind of deal to create the finest white lightning anyone had ever tasted. But the devil always collects his due, and Jeremiah's operation had ended in fire and death. Pure mountain nonsense, I figured. But when 3 different groups of rock climbers reported the same blue flames and alcohol smell over 2 weeks, I knew I had to investigate. The morning I decided to check it out, the temperature was already pushing 90 degrees at sunrise. I packed my standard gear: rope, climbing harness, first aid kit, radio, and my federal citation book. If there was an illegal operation down there, I'd handle it by the book. I also brought my alcohol testing kit and camera. Strange lights usually meant illegal activity of some kind. The hike to the gorge rim took me through dying forest. Leaves were already turning brown in August, and the usual sounds of wildlife were eerily quiet. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. When I reached the edge and looked down into Panther Creek Gorge, the silence felt thick as mountain fog. The descent was tricky, even with proper equipment. Hand over hand down a 150-foot cliff face, finding purchase in cracks and ledges worn smooth by centuries of weather. Halfway down, I caught the first whiff of it. A sweet, sick smell like fermentation, but stronger than anything natural. My feet hit the gorge floor just as the sun cleared the eastern rim, sending long shadows across the narrow space. The creek was barely a trickle, exposing stones that probably hadn't seen daylight in decades. But the smell was stronger now, mixed with something else that made my nose wrinkle: sulfur. I followed the creek bed deeper into the gorge, my boots crunching on dried leaves and exposed gravel. The walls closed in tighter, creating a natural tunnel of stone. That's when I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. Perfect circles of dead vegetation dotted the gorge floor. Not drought damage. These plants looked burned, withered in precise rings about 6 feet across. In the center of each circle, the stone was stained black. I knelt next to one of the circles and touched the blackened rock. It was warm, even though the sun hadn't reached this part of the gorge yet. My metal detector started clicking frantically when I waved it over the area, but there was nothing buried there that I could see. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low bubbling sound, like water boiling in a pot. But there was no fire, no equipment, and definitely no water deep enough to boil. I followed the sound deeper into the gorge, past natural arches, and around bends that seemed to twist back on themselves. The walls were so high and close together that the sky was just a thin blue line overhead. With each step, the smell of alcohol got stronger, and the bubbling sound grew louder. Then I saw the copper. It was just a glint at first, catching sunlight that filtered down through a crack in the gorge wall. But as I got closer, I could see it clearly, a copper pipe emerging from a natural cave in the rock face. The pipe was old, green with age, but it was definitely part of a still operation. The problem was, it should have been impossible. I'd seen plenty of illegal stills in my 15 years as a ranger. Mountain folk had been making moonshine since before there were laws against it, and some of them were pretty clever about hiding their operations. But this setup didn't make sense. For one thing, the pipe was too old. The copper had the kind of patina that takes decades to develop, but it was arranged like someone had just been working on it. Fresh wood was stacked nearby, oak, perfect for smoking the mash. The smell of fermentation was so strong it made my eyes water, but there was no still visible, no mash barrels, no fire source. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. If this was an active operation, I needed evidence. But when I looked through the viewfinder, something was wrong with the images. Blue spots appeared on every shot, dancing lights that weren't visible to my naked eye. The bubbling sound was louder now, definitely coming from inside the cave. I turned on my flashlight and stepped closer to the opening. The beam cut through darkness that seemed thicker than it should be, and the air coming out of the cave was warm and humid despite the drought. That's when I saw the first impossible thing. Inside the cave, maybe 20 feet back, blue flames danced over what looked like a complete moonshine operation. Copper coils, mash barrels, even mason jars lined up like someone was in the middle of a run, but the flames had no source. They just hung in the air above the equipment, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. I'd seen alcohol burn before. It produced a blue flame, but this was different. These flames moved like they were alive, reaching toward me as I approached. The temperature in the cave was at least 20 degrees hotter than outside, and my thermometer couldn't seem to get a steady reading. I should have left right then. Every instinct I'd developed in the Marines and 15 years of ranger work was screaming at me to get out of that cave and radio for backup. But I'd never seen anything like this, and my curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not just alcohol and sulfur now, but something else, something rotten and sweet, like meat left too long in the sun. The blue flames flickered higher as I moved deeper into the cave, and I could hear liquid dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. The still was definitely old, 1,920 seconds equipment from the look of it. But everything was arranged like someone had just been using it. Fresh mash in the barrels, still warm, clean mason jars waiting to be filled. Even an old leather logbook sitting open on a natural stone shelf. I flipped through the logbook pages with my flashlight. The entries were in faded brown ink, dates going back to 1923. Jeremiah Panther's name appeared on every page, along with detailed notes about mash bills, proof levels, and something called the agreement. The last entry was dated October 13, 1924. The flames grow stronger each night. Cannot leave the operation. Must tend the fire. The agreement holds. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, Jeremiah burned tonight. Found only bones and mason jars. Still operates itself now. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. I was looking at historical documents, evidence of what had really happened to the legendary Jeremiah Panther. But that didn't explain the active still, the blue flames, or the warm mash that couldn't possibly be there. I reached out to touch one of the copper coils, wanting to confirm it was real. The metal was hot enough to burn, and the moment my skin made contact, the blue flames roared higher. The bubbling sound became a violent boiling, and through the noise, I heard something else, humming. Someone was humming an old mountain tune, barely audible under the sound of boiling mash. The melody was sad and slow, like a funeral hymn. I spun around, searching the cave with my flashlight, but I was alone. That's when I noticed the shadows. Even with the blue flames dancing all around the cave, my flashlight beam created normal shadows on the walls. But there was one shadow that didn't match anything in the room, the silhouette of a man bent over the still, tending the fire that wasn't there. I moved my light around, trying to find what was casting the shadow. Nothing, but the shadow kept moving, going through the motions of checking the mash, adjusting copper pipes, filling mason jars that I couldn't see. The humming got louder. I backed toward the cave entrance, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the boiling mash. This wasn't just an illegal operation, this was something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw him for the first time. Just a glimpse in my flashlight beam before he melted back into the shadows, but it was enough. Burned flesh, skeletal hands, eyes like blue flames, and overalls that looked like they'd been fused to charred skin. He was real, he was there, and he was still tending his still after nearly 60 years. I ran. I scrambled out of that cave faster than I'd ever moved in my life, stumbling over rocks and crashing into the gorge walls in my panic to get away. Behind me, I could hear the boiling getting louder, the humming turning into something that might have been laughter. I didn't stop running until I reached my climbing rope. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get my harness secured. As I climbed up that cliff face, I could smell sulfur and alcohol rising from the gorge below. When I reached the rim and looked back down, the entire bottom of the gorge was glowing with blue light. I radioed for backup. Fire Inspector Murphy arrived the next morning with a truck full of equipment and a skeptical expression. Sean Murphy was a good man, 20 years fighting fires in coal country, and he'd seen plenty of illegal operations that had gotten out of hand. When I tried to explain what I'd found, he listened politely, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Blue flames without a fuel source, he said, checking his gear. Temperature spikes in a drought. Obadiah, you sure you didn't just find an operation that was burning off alcohol vapors? I couldn't blame him for not believing me. If someone had told me the same story a week ago, I'd have figured they'd been sampling the product themselves. But I'd taken pictures, recorded temperatures, even brought back a mason jar full of creek water that tested positive for alcohol. The water tested at 60 proof, Murphy, I said as we hiked toward the gorge. Creek water doesn't naturally run 30% alcohol. Maybe someone's dumping mash upstream, he suggested. But I could tell he was getting curious despite himself. The descent into the gorge was easier with 2 people. Murphy was a good climber, and we made it to the bottom just as the morning sun was starting to filter down through the stone walls. The burned circles were still there, and the smell hit us immediately. Jesus, Murphy whispered, covering his nose. That's not just alcohol. Smells like something died down here. We followed the same path I'd taken the day before, but this time I wasn't alone. Having Murphy there made me feel braver, more like I was doing my job instead of chasing ghosts. But as we got closer to the cave, I noticed things I'd missed the first time. Footprints in the dried mud by the creek. Bare feet. Burned so badly that the prints showed bone impressions. They were fresh, made since yesterday. What the hell? Murphy knelt next to the prints, taking measurements. These looked like someone walked through fire. Inside the cave, the blue flames were still dancing, but they seemed dimmer in the daylight. The still was exactly as I'd left it, but now there were fresh mason jars lined up, filled with clear liquid that glowed faintly in the strange light. Murphy set up his temperature sensors and gas detectors while I photographed everything. His equipment went crazy the moment we entered the cave. Temperature readings jumping between 40 and 120 degrees, gas detectors finding alcohol vapors that shouldn't exist. This is impossible, Murphy muttered, checking his readings for the 3rd time. The equipment's working fine, but these numbers don't make sense. That's when he found the logbook. I'd left it on the stone shelf, but now it was open to a different page. Murphy's face went white as he read the entry under his flashlight beam. The 15th of October, 1924. He read aloud. Recipe from my grandfather, Sean Murphy, works perfectly. The flames accept his blood as payment. Murphy's hand started shaking. My grandfather, Sean, died in 1924. House fire. But he was just a coal miner, not a moonshiner. I looked over his shoulder at the entry. Below it, in the same brown ink, someone had written, "The grandson will come. The flames remember Murphy blood. We need to get out of here," I said. But Murphy was already walking deeper into the cave, drawn by something I couldn't understand. Sean Murphy, he whispered. That was my grandfather's name. But how could anyone know I'd be here? The blue flames responded to his voice, growing brighter and reaching toward him like living things. The humming started again, that same sad mountain tune, but now I could hear words mixed in. Come taste the fire, Murphy's boy. Come drink the flame and stay a while. Murphy picked up one of the glowing mason jars. Don't. I lunged forward, but I was too late. He'd already brought the jar to his lips. The moment the liquid touched his mouth, Murphy's eyes rolled back, and he started convulsing. The jar fell from his hands, shattering on the cave floor, and the alcohol inside burst into blue flames that spread like wildfire. Murphy was screaming, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was older, rougher, speaking in mountain dialect I could barely understand. "The agreement holds," Murphy's voice said. But it wasn't Murphy talking. "The flames must be tended. The still must run. Blood pays the debt that blood began." The fire spread across the cave floor, following trails of alcohol that led to every corner of the chamber. In the growing light, I could see things I'd missed before. Bones scattered in the shadows, old overalls draped over stone ledges, mason jars filled with ashes instead of moonshine. And standing behind Murphy, guiding his convulsing body toward the still, was the burned figure I'd glimpsed the day before. Jeremiah Panther looked exactly like the old stories described him. Tall, lean mountain man with skilled hands and sharp eyes, but the fire had taken its due. His flesh was charred black in places, missing entirely in others. His overalls had melted into his skin, and where his eyes should have been, blue flames danced. "You came back," Jeremiah said, his voice like wind through a burned forest. "Brought me Murphy blood, just like the flames promised." Murphy had stopped convulsing, but his body was changing. His skin was turning red, then black, blistering like he was being cooked from the inside. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the alcohol vapors, making me gag. "The devil's bargain," Jeremiah explained, never taking his flame eyes off Murphy's transforming body. "Perfect moonshine. But the fire must be tended. Always tended. And the flames are hungry for company." I pulled out my radio, but it was just static. The metal was too hot to hold anyway. My climbing rope was my only way out, and Jeremiah was between me and the cave entrance. "You can't leave," he said, reading my thoughts. "Not now that you've seen the operation. The flames remember everything, and they don't like witnesses walking away." Murphy's transformation was almost complete. His ranger uniform had burned away, replaced by overalls that seemed to grow from his blistering skin. His eyes were starting to glow with the same blue fire. "Help me," Murphy whispered, his voice barely human now. "Can't control." But I could see it was too late. Whatever had taken Jeremiah in 1924 was taking Murphy now. The cursed moonshine was binding him to the still, making him part of the operation that couldn't stop, couldn't die. The blue flames were spreading faster now, climbing the walls, reaching for me. I had maybe seconds before they caught me too. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my climbing axe and started attacking the copper still. The moment my axe hit the copper coils, Jeremiah screamed like a wounded animal. The blue flames roared higher, and the temperature in the cave spiked to unbearable levels. But I kept swinging, because I finally understood what was happening. The still wasn't just equipment, it was the anchor for whatever supernatural contract Jeremiah had made. As long as it kept operating, he was trapped here, bound to tend the flames forever. And now Murphy was being pulled into the same hell. "You don't understand." Jeremiah lunged at me, his burned hands reaching for my throat. "Break the still and the debt transfers. Someone has to tend the flames." I dodged his grab and swung the axe again, this time at the main copper pipe. The metal was so hot it nearly melted the axe head, but I managed to crack it. Scalding alcohol sprayed out, instantly igniting in the blue flames. Murphy was still changing, but he was fighting it now. "Obediah," he gasped. "The logbook," says the contract, "needs willing souls." I glanced at the leather book, still open on its stone shelf. In the growing firelight, I could see more entries appearing on the pages, writing itself in brown ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "New entry," I read aloud while dodging another swipe from Jeremiah. "The 15th of August 1982. Murphy accepts the flames. Thornfield witnesses the agreement." No, I brought the axe down on the main mash barrel, splitting it open. Fermented corn mash poured out, feeding the fires, but also weakening the still's operation. "I don't accept anything." Jeremiah's screaming got louder, more desperate. "You have to. Someone has to tend the flames. I've been alone for 60 years. The blue fires were consuming everything now. The wooden barrels, the stone walls, even the air itself seemed to be burning. Through the flames, I could see shapes moving, other figures in burned overalls, other souls trapped by the devil's bargain over the decades. Murphy was almost gone. his face barely recognizable, but he managed one more coherent sentence. The spring water. The operation needs the spring. Of course, every still needed a water source, and this one was fed by a natural spring in the back of the cave. If I could block the water flow, maybe I could stop the entire operation. I fought my way through the flames to the back of the cave, where clear water bubbled up from cracks in the stone floor. The spring was small but steady, and it fed into a network of copper pipes that distributed water throughout the still. Jeremiah realized what I was doing and threw himself at me with supernatural strength. His burned hands closed around my throat, and up close I could smell the sulfur that clung to him like cheap cologne. 60 years, he hissed, his blue flame eyes boring into mine. 60 years of tending the fire alone. You're not taking away my only chance for company. I couldn't breathe, couldn't break his grip. The flames were getting closer, and I could feel my own skin starting to blister. But I still had the axe in my hand. With the last of my strength, I drove the pick end of the axe into the stone around the spring, wedging it into a crack. Then I used the leverage to pry at the rock, trying to collapse the spring opening. Jeremiah's grip loosened as he realized what was happening. No, without the water, the flames will consume everything. The contract will spread to the entire forest. But it was too late. The stone cracked, then crumbled, and tons of rock crashed down into the spring. The water flow stopped instantly, and the copper pipes started glowing red-hot as the still ran dry. The blue flames turned white, then yellow, then roared into an inferno that lit up the entire cave like daylight. Jeremiah's scream rose above the roar of the fire. But now it sounded different. Not angry or desperate, but almost relieved. Finally, he whispered, as his burned form began to dissolve in the flames. Finally, it ends. Murphy was changing back, his skin healing as the supernatural fire released its hold on him. He was unconscious but breathing, his body returning to normal as the cursed moonshine left his system. The flames were consuming the still now, melting the copper, turning the wooden barrels to ash. But they were also burning themselves out. No longer sustained by the devil's bargain, the supernatural fuel was exhausted. I grabbed Murphy under his arms and dragged him toward the cave entrance. Behind us, the fire was collapsing in on itself, imploding like a star, dying. The temperature dropped from unbearable to merely hot, and fresh air started flowing into the cave. We made it outside just as the cave system collapsed. Tons of stone crashed down, sealing the chamber forever. The blue flames flickered once more through the cracks, then died completely. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Murphy woke up 3 hours later with no memory of what had happened after he picked up the mason jar. The doctor said he'd suffered severe dehydration and heat exhaustion, but there were no burn marks on his body. No evidence of what I'd seen him become. The official report listed it as an illegal moonshine operation that got out of hand during drought conditions. The cave-in was attributed to unstable rock formations weakened by the heat. No mention of supernatural flames, cursed stills, or devil's bargains. But I know what really happened down there. Murphy went back to fighting fires in coal country, but he never quite looked at me the same way again. Sometimes I'd catch him staring, like he was trying to remember something important. He started having nightmares about blue flames, and stopped drinking alcohol entirely. I kept working as a ranger, but my approach changed. When I found evidence of moonshine operations now, I was more careful about how I handled them. Mountain folk had been making white lightning in these hills for generations, and most of them were just trying to make a living. The real danger wasn't the illegal alcohol, it was what people might do to protect their operations. The old-timers in town seemed to know something had changed. They stopped talking about the devil's still in Panther Creek Gorge. When hikers asked about the strange stories, folks would just shake their heads and suggest safer places to explore. But every August, when the drought comes and the Forest Service puts us on fire alert, I make sure to patrol the outer edges of Panther Creek. Just to be safe. Because 3 months after the cave-in, I was checking the area and found something that made my blood run cold. New growth had appeared where the burned circles used to be, plants that shouldn't exist in Kentucky soil. Mountain laurel with leaves that glowed faintly blue in the darkness, creek stones that stayed warm even in winter. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the drought has made everything still and quiet, I swear I can still hear humming echoing up from the sealed cave. That same sad mountain tune Jeremiah used to sing while tending his cursed fire. The devil's bargains in these mountains run deeper than copper pipes and corn mash. They run all the way down to the roots of the hills themselves. And sometimes, when one contract ends, the debt just transfers to the land itself, waiting for the next willing soul to pick up a mason jar and make their own deal with whatever dark forces still move through these ancient gorges. I've been a ranger for 15 years, and I've learned to respect both the law and the old stories. Because in these Kentucky mountains, the two aren't as different as you might think. Some places are just cursed, and the best thing you can do is post warning signs and hope folks are smart enough to stay away. But they never are. My name is Zachariah Coalfield, but everyone calls me Zach. I've been a ranger with Jefferson National Forest for 18 years now, and I've seen things that would make most folks pack up and leave these mountains forever. I grew up in these hills of Southwest Virginia, where coal mining ran in families like a disease you couldn't shake. My daddy worked the mines, and his daddy before him. When I was 12, my Uncle Tommy died in a cave-in at the old Clinch Mountain operation. They never found his body. Said the tunnel collapsed so bad they couldn't dig him out safely. That's when I decided I'd never go underground for coal. Instead, I became a ranger. Figured I'd spend my time above ground, keeping these mountains safe. What I didn't know was that sometimes the mountains don't want to stay safe. My specialty is mine safety and environmental restoration. Sounds fancy, but mostly it means I clean up the mess coal companies leave behind when they pull out. Poisoned streams, unstable ground, tunnels that could swallow a man whole. It's dirty work, but somebody has to do it. The old miners had stories about things that lived in the deep tunnels. They called them Tommy knockers, spirits that would tap on the mine walls to warn of danger. 3 taps meant get out fast. More than 3 meant someone was going to die. I never believed those stories, not until November of 1986. The call came on a Tuesday morning, gray and cold like most November days in these parts. EPA wanted me to survey the abandoned Clinch Mountain workings. Someone reported strange activity, lights seen underground, weird smells coming from the old air shafts. Probably just kids messing around, but federal law said I had to check it out. I loaded my truck with the usual gear: methane detector, structural assessment tools, emergency oxygen, enough rope to get myself out of trouble. My headlamp was new, bright enough to cut through the blackest tunnel. At least that's what I thought. The drive to Clinch Mountain took me past the old company houses, empty now for 40 years. Windows stared like dead eyes at the road. The slag heap rose up beside the main shaft like a gray mountain made by angry gods. Nothing grew on it, nothing ever would. I parked near the main entrance, a concrete portal that looked like a mouth frozen mid-scream. The steel door had been welded shut in 1946, right after the company pulled out. But someone had cut through the welds recently. Fresh metal shavings glittered in the dead grass. The silence hit me first. These mountains are never really quiet. There's always wind in the trees, birds calling, water running somewhere. But here, standing at the mouth of that tunnel, I heard nothing. It was like the mountain was holding its breath. I checked my equipment one more time, then switched on my headlamp. The beam cut into the darkness, but it seemed to get swallowed up after just a few yards. The tunnel stretched ahead, perfectly straight, rails still gleaming despite 4 decades of neglect. My boots echoed on the wooden ties as I walked deeper. The air tasted of coal dust and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. 20 yards in, I found the first sign that someone had been here recently. Fresh coal dust covered the ground in neat piles, like someone had been digging. But the coal seams here had been played out before I was born. There shouldn't be any loose coal to dig. I knelt down and ran the dust through my fingers. It was warm. That should have been my first warning. Coal dust doesn't stay warm in a tunnel that's been sealed for 40 years. But I was thinking like a ranger, not like the grandson of a miner. I was looking for logical explanations when logic had already left the mountain. I pressed deeper into the tunnel, following the main shaft toward the mountain's heart. The methane detector stayed quiet, which was good. Black damp, carbon monoxide, would kill you before you knew it was there. But the deeper I went, the more wrong things felt. The tunnel walls showed fresh pick marks, like someone had been working the coal face recently, but the marks were wrong. Too close together, too shallow, like they'd been made with fingernails instead of proper tools. I'd been underground for maybe an hour when I heard the first tapping. Tap, tap, tap. 3 measured strikes on stone, echoing from somewhere ahead in the darkness. I stopped walking and listened. The sound came again, fainter this time, from a side tunnel that branched off to the right. Tommy knockers, my grandfather would have said. 3 taps means danger. But I was a federal ranger with 18 years of experience. I didn't believe in ghost stories, so I turned right and followed the sound. The side tunnel was narrower, maybe 6 feet high, and just wide enough for a coal car. My headlamp beam reached further here, and I could see where the tunnel branched again about 50 yards ahead. The tapping had stopped. I checked my map. This tunnel should have been flooded in 1947 when they abandoned the mine. But my boots were walking on dry ground, and the air felt stale but breathable. That's when I found Rodriguez. EPA Inspector Carlos Rodriguez had been missing for 3 days. His supervisor said he'd come up here to check on some environmental violations, but he never called in. I'd figured he'd gotten lost on the back roads. Wouldn't be the first time a city boy got turned around in these mountains. But Rodriguez wasn't lost on any road. I found him 30 yards down the side tunnel, pressed against the coal face like he was trying to dig through solid rock with his bare hands. His fingernails were torn and bloody, and coal dust covered his clothes. He wasn't moving. "Rodriguez," I called out, breaking into a run. "Carlos." He didn't answer. When I reached him and put my hand on his shoulder, he was cold as the stone he'd been clawing at. Stone cold, and he'd been dead for hours. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Rodriguez was wedged into a crack in the coal seam, a crack that couldn't have been more than 18 inches wide. Rodriguez was a big man, maybe 200 pounds, and broad in the shoulders. There was no way he could have fit through that gap. No way he could have fit through it alive, anyway. I checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. Rodriguez's eyes were open, staring at something in the coal face. Something I couldn't see. His mouth was open too, like he'd been screaming when he died. I grabbed my radio, but got nothing but static. We were too deep for signals to reach the surface. I was on my own. I should have left right then. Should have gone back to my truck and called for backup. But Rodriguez had been a good man, and I couldn't leave him wedged in that crack like a piece of mining equipment. His family deserved better. I tried to pull him out, but he wouldn't budge. It was like the mountain had swallowed him halfway and decided to keep him. Every time I pulled, the crack seemed to get tighter around his chest. That's when I heard the scratching. It came from deep inside the coal seam, behind where Rodriguez was stuck. A slow, rhythmic scratching like claws on stone, or fingernails on coal. I pressed my ear against the seam and listened. The scratching was definitely there, coming from somewhere impossible. The coal face looked solid, but sound was traveling through it like it was hollow. Asterisk, scritch, 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 asterisk. And then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard something else. Breathing. Something was alive back there in the solid coal. And it was breathing. I yanked my head away from the seam and stumbled backward. My headlamp beam swung wildly around the tunnel, throwing crazy shadows on the walls. For just a second, I thought I saw something moving in one of those shadows. Something pale and too thin, sliding along the wall like water. But when I steadied the light, there was nothing there. Just Rodriguez, dead in the crack, and the sound of breathing from impossible places. I tried to radio for help again, but the static was worse now. It sounded almost like voices, whispered conversations just below the level where I could make out words. My hands were shaking as I clipped the radio back to my belt. The breathing had stopped. The scratching had stopped. Even my own echo seemed to get swallowed up by the tunnel walls. The silence was so complete it felt like being inside a coffin. That's when my headlamp started to dim. The beam flickered once, twice, then settled into a weak yellow glow that barely reached 10 feet ahead. I checked the battery, still showing full charge. But the light kept getting weaker. In the growing darkness, I heard the tapping again. Asterisk, tap, 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 asterisk. 3 strikes, like before. But this time they came from behind me, from the direction I'd come. Something was between me and the way out. Asterisk, tap, 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 asterisk. 4 taps now, more than 3. According to my grandfather's stories, that meant someone was going to die. I had 2 choices: go deeper into the mountain or try to get past whatever was tapping behind me. Neither option felt good, but at least going deeper meant I could look for another way out. These old mines connected to each other like a spider web. Find the right tunnel, and you could come out miles from where you went in. I left Rodriguez where he was. Wasn't anything else I could do for him now. The main tunnel sloped downward as it headed toward the mountain's heart. My weakening headlamp showed wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse. Some of them were cracked, held up by nothing but habit and prayer. Coal dust drifted down from the ceiling like black snow. The deeper I went, the warmer it got. That was wrong too. Mines were supposed to stay cool year-round. But sweat was running down my back, and my breath was starting to fog in the beam of my headlamp. I passed side tunnels every 100 yards or so. Most were blocked by cave-ins or steel doors welded shut, but a few gaped open like hungry mouths, and from those came sounds I didn't want to think about. Scratching, breathing, and once, what sounded like someone crying. My methane detector should have been screaming warnings, but it stayed silent. Whatever was wrong with this place, it wasn't gas. 300 yards from where I'd found Rodriguez, the main tunnel opened into a larger chamber. This was the old loading area where coal cars would be filled from the side tunnels. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls, but I could hear my footsteps echoing in a space much bigger than any tunnel. That's where I found the bones. They were arranged in neat piles around the chamber's edge, sorted by size like someone was organizing them for a purpose. Arm bones here, leg bones there, skulls in a row against the far wall. Most were old, yellow with age, but some still had bits of flesh clinging to them, and some still had bits of clothing. I recognized the EPA badge before I saw the name tag. Rodriguez had been carrying backup identification in his jacket pocket. The jacket was here, torn into strips and woven through a rib cage like someone was trying to make art out of death. But Rodriguez was still wedged in that crack 300 yards behind me. So how did his jacket get here? I was staring at the bone arrangement when my headlamp finally died completely. The darkness in a mine isn't like darkness anywhere else. It's absolute. Hold your hand an inch from your face and you can't see it. The darkness has weight to it, pressing down on you like tons of rock. I fumbled for my backup flashlight, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. When the beam came on, it showed something that made my knees go weak. The bones had moved. They were still arranged in piles, but the piles were different, closer together. And in the center of the chamber, where there had been empty space before, now sat a perfect skeleton, complete from skull to foot bones, assembled like someone who knew what they were doing, like someone who'd had practice. The skeleton was wrong, though. Too long in the arms and legs. The spine was stretched like taffy, and the skull was elongated in a way that would never fit a human brain. It looked like what a person might become if they got pulled through something too small for them to fit through. Something like an 18-inch crack in a coal seam. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, keeping my light on the skeleton. But as I moved, I heard something that stopped my blood cold. The bones were clicking together, settling, like they were trying to stand up. That's when I ran. I sprinted back through the main tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind me came a sound like a dozen people typing on keyboards, the click and clatter of bone against bone, and underneath that, a wet sliding sound like something being dragged across stone. My boots pounded on the wooden ties. I could see the side tunnel where Rodriguez was stuck, getting closer. 20 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. The clicking sounds were getting louder, closer. I reached the side tunnel and risked a look back. My flashlight beam caught something pale moving along the tunnel ceiling. It flowed like water, but it had too many joints and moved in ways that hurt to watch. Rodriguez was still in the crack where I'd left him. But something was different. His eyes were closed now, and his mouth was moving like he was trying to say something. "Rodriguez?" I whispered. His eyes snapped open. They were completely black, like lumps of coal pressed into his skull. "Get out," he whispered, his voice thick with coal dust. "It's coming." The wet sliding sound was getting closer. I could hear breathing again, but it was wrong. Too fast, like a dog panting. And there was more than one set of breaths. Rodriguez's coal-black eyes fixed on mine. "It lives in the seams," he whispered. "Feeds on what the mountain gives it. Bone and coal, coal and bone. All the same to it." "What is it?" I asked. But Rodriguez's eyes had already gone blank again. The sliding sound reached the junction where our tunnel met the main shaft. My flashlight showed something that shouldn't exist, something pale and impossibly long, squeezing through gaps in the support beams like it was made of liquid. But it wasn't liquid. It was alive. And it was looking for me. I ran deeper into the side tunnel, away from the thing that was squeezing through the support beams. The tunnel got narrower as it went, until I had to duck to keep from hitting my head on the ceiling. Behind me, the wet sliding sound kept getting closer. The tunnel ended at a coal face, solid black wall that looked like it had never been worked. But there were fresh scratches in the coal, and the wall felt warm when I pressed my hand against it. I was trapped. I turned around with my flashlight ready, expecting to see death flowing down the tunnel toward me. But the tunnel was empty. The sliding sound had stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something that made my heart nearly stop. Tapping. From inside, the coal face behind me. Tap, tap, tap. 3 strikes, muffled by tons of rock. Then a voice, faint but clear. "Zach. That you, boy?" It was Uncle Tommy's voice. The uncle who died in this mine 40 years ago. "Uncle Tommy," I whispered to the coal face. "Been waiting for you," the voice said. "Been waiting so long. It's got us all down here, Zach. All of us who died in the dark." The coal face was warming up under my hand. I could feel vibrations through the rock, like something large moving around on the other side. "What's got you, Uncle Tommy?" "The hunger," he said. "It was already here when we broke through in 46. Living in the deep seams, older than the mountains. We disturbed it, and it took us. Keeps us, feeds on us. How do I get out? Can't fight it, boy. It's part of the mountain now, part of us, but maybe." The voice faded for a moment. "Maybe you can give us what we never got." "What's that?" "A proper burial, water to wash us clean." Behind me, the wet sliding sound started up again, closer now. I could hear breathing, and something that might have been laughing. "The main shaft," Uncle Tommy's voice said urgently. "Old dynamite charges still in place. Company left them when they sealed us in. Flood charges to keep the mine from poisoning the groundwater. You trigger those, and the whole system fills up. That'll kill me too. Maybe, maybe not, but it'll give us peace, and it'll take the hunger with us." I turned around. Something pale was flowing down the tunnel toward me, moving like thick smoke. As it got closer, I could see what it really was. People. Or what was left of people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all stretched and twisted and compressed together into one writhing mass of arms and legs and faces. Some of the faces I recognized from old mining photos in the town museum. They'd been the workers who died in the 1946 disaster, the disaster Uncle Tommy died in. But they hadn't died clean. They'd been taken by something that lived in the deep coal seams, something that fed on bone and rock and the fear of men who worked in the dark. The mass of bodies flowed closer, and I could see my Uncle Tommy's face among them. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. Behind his eyes, I could see 40 years of hunger and pain. I pressed my back against the coal face and raised my flashlight like a weapon. The light seemed to hurt the thing. It slowed down and made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. That's when I remembered my emergency flares. Every ranger carries road flares for emergencies. They burn hot and bright, hot enough to melt metal. I pulled one from my pack and struck it against the rough coal wall. The flare burst into brilliant red light, and the thing in the tunnel screamed. It was the sound of 100 men dying at once, echoing off the tunnel walls until I thought my eardrums would burst. The creature flowed backward, away from the light. But I knew the flare wouldn't last long. Maybe 5 minutes of burning time. I had to reach the main shaft and trigger those flood charges before the light died. I ran through tunnels I'd never seen before, following Uncle Tommy's voice when he could speak and my own instincts when he couldn't. The flare lit my way like a torch, throwing crazy red shadows on the walls. Behind me came the sound of the creature following, staying just outside the circle of light. Sometimes I could hear individual voices in its mass. Men calling for help. Men begging to be let go. Men who'd been trapped in the dark for 40 years. The main shaft was a vertical tunnel that dropped straight down into the mountain's heart. At the bottom, I could see water gleaming in my flare light. The flood charges were mounted on the walls, connected to a manual detonator that sat in a waterproof box. The box was locked, but 40 years underground had rusted the metal. I smashed it open with a rock and found the detonator inside, still connected to cables that disappeared into holes drilled in the shaft walls. My flare was burning lower, maybe 2 minutes left. The creature flowed into the shaft chamber, staying in the shadows but getting closer. I could see Uncle Tommy's face more clearly now, and the faces of dozens of other men. They were trying to fight the thing that held them, trying to break free. "Do it, boy," Uncle Tommy's voice said. "Give us peace." I put my hand on the detonator handle. "What about me?" "Hold on tight," he said. "And hold your breath." I gripped the handle and looked up at the creature one more time. For just a second, all the faces in its mass turned toward me. Some were angry, some were sad, but most were just tired. 40 years of being hungry and trapped and used for something else's purpose. "This is for all of you," I said, and threw the switch. The explosions came in sequence, starting deep in the mountain and working their way up. Each charge blew out a section of tunnel wall, and behind those walls was water. Lots of water. The mountain had been holding back underground rivers for 100 years, and now they all came rushing in at once. The flood hit the bottom of the shaft like a fist. I had maybe 10 seconds before the water reached me. I grabbed onto the ladder, bolted to the shaft wall, and held on like my life depended on it. Which it did. The water came up fast, black as coal and cold as winter. It filled the shaft in less than a minute, and I was underwater, holding my breath and trying not to panic. The current wanted to tear me loose from the ladder and drag me down into the flooded tunnels. But something else was in the water with me. I felt hands on my shoulders, not the grasping claws of the creature, but gentle hands that pushed me upward. Uncle Tommy and the others, helping me reach the surface one last time. I broke through into an air pocket near the top of the shaft and gasped for breath. The water was still rising, but slower now. Through the black water, I could see lights moving below me. Not the harsh beam of a flashlight, but soft glowing lights like candles. The miners were going home. It took the mine rescue team 6 hours to find me. They pulled me out through an old ventilation shaft, half drowned and talking about things they didn't want to believe. The official report said I'd suffered from oxygen deprivation and hallucinations brought on by methane exposure. They never found Rodriguez's body. The whole mine system had flooded completely, and they said it would take years to pump it out. Maybe they never would. Maybe that was for the best. I kept working as a ranger for another 12 years, until my retirement in 1998. But I never went underground again. These mountains have enough secrets buried in them. Some of them should stay buried. The Clinch Mountain mine is still flooded today. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, local folks say they can hear tapping from underground. But it's not the desperate scratching of something trying to get out. It's the steady rhythm of men working together, the way miners always did. The sound of picks striking coal, of men singing work songs to pass the time. The sound of peace, finally found in the dark places where they lived and died. I still visit Uncle Tommy's grave every year on the anniversary of the cave-in. His headstone says, "Lost in the mine, 1946, but I know better now." He wasn't lost. He was exactly where he needed to be, keeping watch over something that should never see daylight. Some folks say the coal companies are looking at reopening the old workings. Now that environmental regulations are getting looser, they talk about new technology, safer methods, ways to extract coal without flooding. If they do try to reopen Clinch Mountain, I'll be there to stop them. Not as a federal ranger, I'm too old for that job now, but as the nephew of a miner who finally got his proper burial, and as the only living man who knows what's sleeping in those flooded tunnels. Some hungers are too old and too deep to ever really die. They just wait in the dark, patient as stone, until someone disturbs their rest. The Tommy knockers aren't gone, they're just quiet now, resting in the water that washes their bones clean. But if you listen close on still nights near the old mine entrances, you can still hear them tapping on the walls. 3 taps means danger. More than 3 means run. And if you hear no taps at all, well, that means they're too busy to warn you about what's coming up from the deep places where the coal seams run. But don't worry, I'll keep listening for them. Someone has to. Someone who knows the difference between the living and the dead, and the things that live in the spaces between. My name is Zachariah Coalfield, and this is my story. It's all true, every word. And if you don't believe me, take a drive up to Clinch Mountain some quiet night. Listen for the tapping. Just don't go inside when you hear it. My name is Cordelia Waterstone, and I've been a park ranger at Cumberland Falls for 13 years now. People think being a ranger is all campfires and nature walks, but the truth is, most of my work happens when everyone else goes home. Night shifts, solo patrols, making sure visitors stay safe when they come to see something most folks don't even believe exists. Cumberland Falls is the only place in the Western Hemisphere where you can see a moonbow. That's a rainbow made by moonlight instead of sunlight. Sounds impossible, right? But on clear nights, when the moon is full, the mist from our 125-foot waterfall catches the light just right, creates this ghostly arc of silver and blue that stretches across the gorge. I used to teach astronomy before this job. Thought I had all the science figured out. Water droplets, light refraction, lunar cycles, simple physics. The Cherokee, who lived here first, they had different ideas. Called this place sacred. Said the moon woman lived in the falls, and she didn't like visitors during the full moon. I never believed any of that stuff. Cherokee folklore, tourist legends, old wives' tales. After all, I'd seen hundreds of moonbows, photographed them, timed them, explained the science to thousands of visitors. Just water and light, nothing more. That changed last October. It was a perfect night for moonbow viewing. Clear skies, full moon rising over the gorge, steady mist from the falls. I'd set up the usual viewing area for the late-night crowd, about 20 people with cameras and blankets, all waiting for the show to start. The moonbow appeared right on schedule. Beautiful silver arc stretching across the mist, just like always. Visitors were snapping photos, kids pointing and laughing, everything normal. Then Mrs. Henderson, a tourist from Ohio, grabbed my arm. "Ranger Waterstone," she whispered, pointing at the moonbow. "There's someone in there." I looked where she pointed. Just mist and moonlight, same as always. "Sometimes the light plays tricks," I told her. "Makes you think you see things." But she wouldn't let it go. "No, look closer. There's a woman dancing inside the rainbow." I pulled out my binoculars, studied every inch of that moonbow. Nothing there but mist and reflected light. But Mrs. Henderson kept insisting, and soon other visitors were murmuring, pointing at the same spot. "She's walking on the water," someone said. "Her dress is made of light. She's looking right at us." I saw nothing, but my radio started crackling with static, even though it worked fine an hour earlier. My flashlight dimmed, and the waterfall? This sounds crazy, but the waterfall got quieter. Not silent, but muted, like someone had turned down the volume on nature itself. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Every single person staring at the moonbow had the same expression. Eyes wide, mouths slightly open, like they were hypnotized. Like they were seeing the most beautiful thing in the world. I counted heads, started with 20 visitors. Now I only saw 19. "Hey," I called out, "everyone stay together." The spell broke. People blinked, looked around confused. The waterfall roared back to full volume. My radio cleared up. But Jake Morrison, the young photographer from Kentucky, was gone. We searched all night, found his camera by the edge of the viewing pool, still running. When I checked the photos later, most were normal moonbow shots. But the last 3 pictures showed something impossible. A woman made of mist and moonlight, standing in the center of the rainbow. She wore a dress that flowed like water, and her hair streamed with colors that shouldn't exist in moonlight. Her face was beautiful and terrible, with eyes that looked straight into the camera. In the final photo, she was reaching toward whoever held the camera, reaching out of the moonbow itself. We never found Jake Morrison. Park Service called it an accidental drowning, even though we never found a body. "Case closed," they said. These things happen near waterfalls, but I kept those photos. Studied them every day. Started reading the old Cherokee stories about this place. Stories about the moon woman who collected souls during the full moon, trapping them in her underwater palace beneath the falls. Stories I should have listened to a long time ago. The next month, I changed my patrol schedule, started coming in 2 hours before moonbow time, checking every inch of the viewing area. If something was hunting my visitors, I wanted to be ready. November's full moon brought a bigger crowd. Word was spreading about Jake's disappearance. And that always draws the thrill seekers. 35 people this time, including a paranormal investigation team from Tennessee. I set up my equipment early. Night vision scope, electromagnetic field detector, infrared thermometer, gear I'd borrowed from the university where I used to teach. If something supernatural was happening here, science would catch it. The paranormal team set up their own equipment: cameras, recording devices, motion sensors. Their leader, a serious woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had studied Jake's photos. She believed something was there. Energy readings are off the charts, she told me as the moon rose. Whatever's in this place, it's active tonight. The moonbow appeared at 9:47 p.m., right on schedule. But something was different. Instead of the usual silver-blue arc, this one had 7 colors. 7 distinct bands of light, including colors that don't exist in normal rainbows. That's impossible, I muttered, checking my notes. Moonbows only show white and pale blue. Dr. Chen's equipment started going crazy. Beeping, flashing, recording readings that shouldn't exist. The electromagnetic field just spiked, she said. Something's manifesting. That's when we heard the singing. It started soft, like wind through the trees. But gradually, we realized it was a human voice. A woman's voice, coming from inside the waterfall itself. Singing in a language none of us recognized, but somehow, we all understood what it meant. Asterisk, come to the water, come and dance, come and never leave. Asterisk. The visitors started moving toward the pool. Not walking, drifting, like they were sleepwalking. Their eyes were fixed on the moonbow, and they all wore the same dreamy expression I'd seen last month. Stop, I shouted, but my voice sounded tiny against the singing. Everyone stay back from the water. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. Look at the moonbow, she whispered. I looked. Inside the arc of impossible colors, a figure was taking shape. The same woman from Jake's photos, but clearer now. More solid. She danced in the air above the water, her feet never touching the surface. Her dress flowed like liquid moonlight, and her hair streamed with all 7 colors of the moonbow. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And the most terrifying. The singing got louder. More visitors started walking toward the water, including 2 of Dr. Chen's team members. I ran after them, grabbed their arms, tried to pull them back. That's when I saw their reflections in the pool. The water should have shown 35 people standing on the viewing platform. Instead, it showed 37. 2 extra figures standing among us, people I'd never seen before, wearing clothes from decades past. One was Jake Morrison. I blinked hard, looked again. Jake's reflection waved at me from the water, even though Jake wasn't there. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the singing. Behind him, other figures appeared. Men and women in clothing from different eras, all waving, all trying to speak. All trapped in the reflection. Dr. Chen, I yelled, look at the water. But when I turned around, Dr. Chen was gone. So were 3 of her team members. The rest of the visitors stood frozen, staring at the dancing woman in the moonbow. I grabbed my radio. This is Ranger Waterstone. I need backup at Cumberland Falls immediately. We have missing persons. Static, dead air. Then, impossibly, Jake Morrison's voice came through the speaker. Cordelia, he said, clear as day. She's so beautiful, the moon woman. She showed me her palace under the water. Crystal halls, rooms made of flowing light. I never want to leave. Jake, where are you? In the reflection. In the dancing light, she collects us, Cordelia. Collects our souls in the moonbow. We're her treasures now. The radio went dead. I looked back at the water. Doctor? Chen's reflection stood next to Jake's, both of them waving from inside the pool. But on the platform, their bodies were nowhere to be found. The moon woman's singing reached a crescendo, and the remaining visitors took another step toward the water. Soon, they'd all be in the pool, all be trapped in her underwater collection. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed my emergency flare gun and fired it straight at the moonbow. The red flare tore through the arc of light. The moon woman's song cut off with a shriek that sounded like breaking glass. The dancing figure dissolved back into mist, and the impossible colors faded to normal moonbow silver blue. The visitors blinked, looked around confused. What happened? Someone asked. Where's Dr. Chen? I helped them pack up and leave, told them there'd been a technical problem with the equipment, made up some story about gas leaks from the falls causing hallucinations. Most of them believed it, But I knew the truth. The moon woman was real, and she was hunting during every full moon, collecting souls, trapping them in reflections, adding them to her underwater palace. And next month, she'd be hungry again. I spent the next 3 weeks researching everything I could find about Cumberland Falls. Old newspapers, Cherokee oral histories, missing persons reports going back to the 1800s. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every full moon, people disappeared near the falls. Sometimes one, sometimes several. Always during moonbow viewing. Always near water. The bodies were never found, but witnesses reported seeing figures in the mist, hearing, singing, watching people walk into the falls and vanish. The Cherokee stories were more specific. They told of a medicine woman named Ayanna who guarded the sacred waterfall. She was supposed to protect the place from those who would harm it. But something went wrong. The spirits of the water corrupted her, turned her into something hungry and beautiful and terrible. They called her Envihayskaya, the moon woman. Said she lived in a crystal palace beneath the falls, surrounded by the souls she'd stolen over the centuries. The Cherokee tried to bind her with ceremonies and sacred stones, but she grew stronger with each soul she claimed. Eventually, they just stopped going to the falls during the full moon, told their children to avoid the water when the moonbow appeared. The warnings became legends, and the legends became stories no one believed anymore. I believed them now. December's full moon was 2 days away. I put in for vacation time, planned to spend the night patrolling alone. If the moon woman wanted to collect souls, she'd have to go through me first. But my supervisor, Janet Mills, had other ideas. "Cordelia, you've been acting strange lately," she said when I requested the time off. All this research about disappearances, asking weird questions about Cherokee folklore. Maybe you should take some real vacation time. Get away from the falls for a while. Janet, you don't understand. People are in danger during the full moon. Something's hunting visitors. She gave me that look people get when they think you're losing your mind. Cordelia, 3 people have gone missing in 2 months. That's tragic, but it happens. People get too close to the water, they slip, they fall. It's not some supernatural entity. Then explain Jake's photos. Explain the electromagnetic readings Dr. Chen recorded before she vanished. Equipment malfunctions. Digital artifacts. There's always a rational explanation. I tried to convince her, but Janet had made up her mind. She assigned me to the visitor center for the next week, filing paperwork and updating exhibits, far away from the falls during moonbow season. So I went anyway. I snuck out of my apartment at 10 p.m. on December's full moon night, drove to the falls using the service road. Parked in the woods and hiked to the viewing area with my equipment. If I couldn't stop the moon woman officially, I'd do it as a private citizen. The viewing area was empty. Word had spread about the disappearances, and visitor numbers were way down. Good. Fewer people to protect. I set up my gear and waited. Electromagnetic detector, infrared scope, camera with fresh batteries, emergency flares, and something new. A piece of Cherokee iron I'd bought from a museum shop. The old stories said iron could disrupt spirits, break supernatural bonds. The moonbow appeared at 10:23 p.m. Normal colors this time, just silver blue mist and refracted light. I scanned it with my equipment, watching for any sign of the moon woman. Nothing at first. Then my electromagnetic detector started beeping. Faint at first, then stronger. Something was building in the mist above the falls. The singing started. This time, I was ready for it. I put in earplugs, tried to block out the hypnotic melody. But even muffled, the song was beautiful beyond description. It promised peace, love, eternal beauty, in a palace of flowing light. I almost took out the earplugs, almost stepped toward the water. That's when I saw her. The moon woman materialized in the center of the moonbow, more solid than before. Her dress flowed like captured starlight, and her hair streamed with colors that hurt to look at. She was impossibly beautiful, like someone had taken every lovely thing in the world and shaped them into human form. She looked directly at me and smiled. "Cordelia Waterstone," she said, and her voice carried over the waterfall's roar like she was standing next to me. "The ranger who thinks she can save them all. Do you know how long I've waited for you?" I raised my camera, started taking pictures. The flash didn't seem to bother her. "Every full moon, you send me visitors," she continued, dancing on air above the pool. "Teachers, photographers, researchers. Such interesting souls. Such beautiful memories to collect. Let them go, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Let all of them go. She laughed like music made of water. Why would I do that? They're happy in my palace. Safe from time, safe from aging, safe from pain. They dance in my crystal halls forever, and they never want to leave. I looked at the water. Sure enough, reflections filled the pool. Jake Morrison, Dr. Chen, dozens of others from different time periods, all of them waving, all of them trying to speak. They don't look happy, I said. The Moon Woman's expression darkened. You know nothing of happiness, little ranger. You work alone, sleep alone, live alone. Join my collection, and you'll never be lonely again. She began to descend toward the water, her feet almost touching the surface. As she moved, my reflection in the pool started to change. Instead of showing me as I was, it showed me as I could be. Younger, more beautiful, dressed in flowing robes of moonlight. Look at yourself, Cordelia. See what you could become. My reflection smiled and beckoned, started moving independently, reaching out of the water toward me. I found myself taking a step toward the pool, then another. That's when Janet Mills came crashing through the trees. Cordelia, she yelled, what the hell are you doing here? The spell broke. I jerked back from the water's edge, nearly falling. The Moon Woman shrieked in fury and began to fade. Janet, get back. Don't look at the water. But Janet was already staring at the moonbow. At the dissolving figure of the Moon Woman, her mouth dropped open. That's impossible, she whispered. Janet, don't listen to her singing. Don't. Too late. The Moon Woman's voice rose again, calling Janet's name. And Janet started walking toward the pool with that same dreamy expression I'd seen so many times before. I tackled her before she could reach the water. We went down hard on the rocky viewing platform, Janet struggling to get free. Let me go, she said. She's so beautiful. Cordelia, she wants to show me her palace. I held on tight, even as Janet fought me. In the water, I could see her reflection already changing, showing a younger version of herself dressed in the Moon Woman's flowing robes. That's when I realized the terrible truth. The Moon Woman wasn't just collecting souls, she was creating servants, turning her victims into extensions of herself, using their reflections to lure more people into her trap. And if I didn't stop her soon, she'd have an army of them. I dragged Janet back to the tree line, away from the water. She fought me the whole way, reaching toward the moonbow where the Moon Woman still danced. You don't understand, Janet gasped. She's offering me eternal beauty, eternal youth, a palace made of flowing light where I'll never grow old, never die. Janet, look at the water, look at the people trapped in there. I forced her to look at the pool. In the reflection, dozens of figures waved desperately, men and women from different eras, all trying to speak, all trapped in the Moon Woman's underwater collection. Janet's eyes cleared for a moment. Oh God, she whispered. They're prisoners. The Moon Woman's singing grew louder, more insistent. In the moonbow, she raised her arms, and the water in the pool began to glow with silver light. The trapped reflections became more solid, more desperate. She's calling them up, I realized. She's bringing her collection to the surface. The first figure emerged from the pool. A man in a 1,922nd suit, dripping with silver water, but somehow still transparent. Behind him came others. Jake Morrison, Dr. Chen, people in clothing from across the decades. They moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes fixed on Janet and me. Beautiful, terrible servants of the Moon Woman, come to drag us into the water. I pulled out the Cherokee iron, held it up like a shield. The approaching figures recoiled, hissing like steam. Iron, I said. The stories were right. You can't touch iron. The Moon Woman's laughter echoed across the gorge. Clever little ranger, but iron only delays the inevitable. My servants will wait. I have all the time in the world. More figures emerged from the pool. Soon, an entire army of water-soaked souls surrounded us, keeping their distance from the iron but boxing us in. We couldn't stay here forever. That's when I remembered something from my Cherokee research. The binding ceremony. The ritual that had originally trapped the Moon Woman in the falls before she grew too strong and corrupted. It required 3 elements: sacred water from the source, iron to bind the spirit, and the willing sacrifice of a guardian. I had the iron. The sacred water was all around us. Cumberland Falls itself was the source. But the willing sacrifice. Janet, I said quietly, I need you to listen carefully. There's a way to stop her, but it's dangerous. What do you mean? The Cherokee bound her before with a ceremony. A guardian willingly joined with the Moon Woman to keep her trapped. But something went wrong, and she corrupted the guardian instead. The water-soaked figures were closing in, step by step. The Moon Woman descended further, her feet almost touching the pool. Cordelia, she called. Join me willingly, and I'll let your friend live. Fight me, and I'll take you both. What choice do we have? Janet whispered. I looked at the iron in my hand, then at the approaching army of souls. Made my decision. The choice is mine, I called to the Moon Woman. I'll come willingly, but only if you release all of them. Every soul you've taken over the centuries. The Moon Woman paused, considering. You would trade yourself for strangers? I would. Cordelia, no. Janet grabbed my arm. There has to be another way. But I'd already started walking toward the pool. The water-soaked figures parted to let me through, forming a path to their mistress. The Moon Woman smiled as I approached. Wise choice, little ranger. Join my collection, and you'll dance in crystal halls forever. I reached the edge of the water. The Moon Woman extended her hand, beckoning me into the pool. Just one thing, I said, and pulled out my radio. Her smile faltered. What are you? I keyed the transmitter and spoke the Cherokee binding words I'd memorized from the old stories. Words of binding, of sacrifice, of willing guardianship. But I changed the ending. Instead of joining with the spirit to guard the sacred place, I used the iron to bind her. Used my radio to broadcast the words across all frequencies, letting the electromagnetic energy carry the ceremony into the water itself. The Moon Woman shrieked as silver chains of light wrapped around her. The army of souls began to dissolve, their faces showing relief as they finally found peace. Impossible, she screamed. You can't break a bond that's lasted centuries. I'm not breaking it, I said. I'm changing it. You were supposed to be a guardian, not a collector. Guardian spirits protect people. They don't kill them. The chains tightened. The Moon Woman's beautiful form began to crack like broken crystal. Underneath, I glimpsed her true self. Not a monster, but a woman driven mad by centuries of corrupted purpose. Help me remember, I said gently. Remember who you were before the corruption. Remember why you loved this place. For a moment, her expression softened. Ayana, she whispered. My name was Ayana. I was supposed to protect the sacred falls. You still can. Protect them the right way. Guide people safely, don't trap them. The silver chains began to change, becoming bonds of light instead of binding. The Moon Woman, Ayana, looked at her hands in wonder as the corruption fell away like old skin. I remember now, she said. What have I done? What you thought was right. But you can do better now. She nodded, tears of light streaming down her face. I will guard this place properly. No more collecting souls. No more crystal prisons. She looked at me one last time. Thank you, Ranger Waterstone, for helping me remember. Then she dissolved into the mist, becoming one with the waterfall itself. The moonbow returned to normal colors, and the pool cleared of reflections. Janet helped me back from the water's edge. Is it over? I felt different. Changed. Like I'd touched something sacred and been marked by it. For now, I said. But this place will always need a guardian. Someone who understands both the science and the spirit of it. As we packed up our equipment, I caught a glimpse of movement in the moonbow. Not the Moon Woman, but something else. A gentle presence that felt like protection instead of predation. Ayana, keeping watch over her sacred falls. The official report blamed the disappearances on a sinkhole that had opened under the pool during seismic activity. Dr. Chen and her team were found 3 days later, suffering from hypothermia and memory loss in a cave system behind the falls. They had no recollection of what happened during the missing time. Jake Morrison turned up a week after that, wandering the highway outside the park with no memory of the past 2 months. Medical exams showed signs of prolonged exposure to cold and moisture, but he was otherwise unharmed. The other missing persons, people who'd vanished over the decades, their fates remained officially unknown. But sometimes, on quiet nights, visitors to Cumberland Falls reported seeing figures in the moonbow. Not threatening figures, but peaceful ones. Souls finally free to move on, pausing only to wave goodbye to the living world. I stayed on as head ranger, but my role changed. I became an unofficial guardian of the falls, someone who understood that some places exist at the intersection of science and spirit. The moonbow still appears every full moon, still draws crowds of visitors with cameras and wonder. But now it's just water and light again. Beautiful and natural and safe. Mostly safe, anyway. Janet never talked about what she saw that night, but she treated the Cherokee stories with new respect. She started including them in our educational programs, presenting them not as folklore but as another way of understanding the natural world. Sometimes, late at night when I'm doing my rounds, I hear singing from the waterfall. Not the hypnotic, predatory song of the Moon Woman, but something gentler. A lullaby, maybe, or a blessing. Ayana, keeping her promise to guard this sacred place the right way. I've learned to listen to those old stories now. There are other places in these mountains, other intersections of the natural and supernatural that need watching. The Cherokee knew about all of them, marked them in stories and ceremonies and warnings. Most people still don't believe. They think science explains everything, that there's a rational answer for every mystery. I used to think that too. But 13 years of night shifts at Cumberland Falls have taught me something important. The world is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than our instruments can measure. Some places are sacred, some stories are true, even when they're impossible. And sometimes, it takes a guardian to keep the balance between what is and what should never be. The moonbow still appears every full moon, painting the mist with silver light. Visitors still come to take pictures and make wishes on the lunar rainbow. Children still laugh and point at the impossible beauty of it all. But now, when they look into the water, they see only their own reflections looking back. That's how it should be. That's how Ayana, the true guardian of Cumberland Falls, makes sure it stays. My name is Augustus Beauregard Tunnelwood, but folks just call me Gus. Been a ranger here in Cherokee National Forest for 21 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at a man. Bears, floods, lost hikers, drug runners, you name it. But I never believed in ghosts. Not until December of 1988, when I met myself coming out of Tunnel 7. I worked the old railroad territory, mostly. Miles and miles of abandoned tracks from the 1,920 seconds, when the railroad company tried to punch a line straight through these mountains. They gave up after 3 workers died in a tunnel collapse, but the tunnels are still here. My job is keeping the hiking trails safe, making sure nobody falls into a hole or gets hurt on the old rusty tracks. I know these tunnels better than my own backyard. Used to work for the railroad myself, before I became a ranger. That was back in Alabama, before I moved up here after my brother died in a train accident. Maybe that's why I took this job. Felt like I owed something to the railroad, even the dead parts of it. The work keeps me busy. Trail maintenance, checking the old bridges, making sure hikers don't wander into dangerous spots. I've got my truck loaded with all the gear, inspection lights, safety rope, first aid kit, radio that barely works in these mountains. Most days, I'm the only person for miles around. These mountains hold their secrets tight. The locals tell stories about the old railroad days, about workers who never came home, about voices in the tunnels singing work songs nobody's heard in 60 years. I always figured it was just mountain talk. You know how it is in small towns. People love their ghost stories. But there was always something strange about Tunnel 7. It's the longest one, cuts right through Lookout Ridge. The entrance is all grown over with vines now, and inside it's dark as a grave. I check it twice a year, part of my regular rounds. The tunnel's still solid, built to last, but there's something about the air in there that makes your skin crawl. Last winter was rough. Storm after storm, trees down everywhere, trails washed out. I was working overtime just to keep the main paths open. That's when my crew started reporting weird things. "Hey Gus," my assistant Jake said one morning in December. "You been working nights lately?" "No, why?" "No. Found fresh tool marks in Tunnel 3 yesterday. Looked like somebody's been fixing the old rail bed. Real professional work too." I shrugged it off. Maybe some railroad history buffs had wandered in. Happens sometimes. But then my supervisor, Mills, called me into his office. "Gus, we got complaints from hikers. They're saying they saw work crews in the tunnels, but I don't have anybody scheduled out there." "You know anything about this?" I didn't, but I promised to check it out. That afternoon, I loaded up my truck and headed for the tunnel system. Snow was starting to fall, and the mountains looked like something from a Christmas card. Pretty, but cold as hell. The first thing I noticed was the tire tracks. Fresh ones, leading right up to Tunnel 7. But when I got out of my truck, I could see the tracks just stopped, like whoever made them had driven straight into solid rock. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the tunnel. The air was still and cold, and my breath made little clouds in the beam of my light. About 50 yards in, I found them, the fresh tool marks Jake had mentioned. Somebody had been working on the old railroad bed, cleaning out debris, straightening the rails that were still there. But here's the thing, this was expert work. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Every spike was placed perfect. Every rail joint lined up just right. This wasn't some amateur history buff. This was professional railroad work. And it was impossible. Those tools' marks were fresh, maybe a day old. But I'd been through this tunnel just last week, and it had been the same old mess it always was. Standing there in that dark tunnel, with snow falling outside and my flashlight cutting through the blackness, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. That crawling feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even though you can't see anybody. I called out, "Hello? Anybody in here?" My voice echoed back from the deep parts of the tunnel, but nobody answered. Just my own words, bouncing off the stone walls, getting smaller and sadder each time. That's when I heard it. Faint, but clear as anything, the sound of someone whistling. An old work song, the kind railroad gangs used to sing to keep time while they laid track. The melody drifted out of the darkness like smoke. I followed the sound deeper into the tunnel, my heart beating hard. The whistling stayed just ahead of me, always just around the next bend. The air got colder as I went, and I could smell something strange. Coal smoke and machine oil, like a locomotive had just passed through. But that was crazy. No train had been in these tunnels for 60 years. The next morning, I called in Jake and 2 other rangers, Tommy and Bill. We were going to check every tunnel in the system, see if we could figure out what was going on. I didn't tell them about the whistling. They already thought I was getting old. "Probably just some kids," Jake said as we parked at the tunnel entrance. You know how they love to explore old places. But when we got inside Tunnel 7 with our gear, it was clear this wasn't kids' work. Someone had been busy all night. The rail bed was completely cleared of debris for about 100 yards. Old crosties that had been rotted and broken were somehow solid again, lined up perfect as a ruler. "Jesus," Tommy whispered, running his hand along a rail. "This metal's been polished. Look at it shine." He was right. The old rusty rails looked like they'd just come from the factory. But that was impossible. Steel doesn't fix itself. We split up to cover more ground. Jake and Bill went to check the side tunnels. Tommy and I kept going deeper into 7. Our flashlights made long shadows on the tunnel walls, and our footsteps echoed like drum beats. About a quarter mile in, Tommy grabbed my arm. "Gus, look." Up ahead, in the glow of our lights, we could see someone working. A man in old-fashioned railroad clothes, thick pants, suspenders, work boots. He had his back to us and was doing something to the track with a long-handled tool. "Hey," I called out, "this is restricted area." The man didn't turn around, didn't even stop working. He just kept doing whatever he was doing, completely ignoring us. We walked closer. The man was tall and thin, and there was something familiar about the way he moved. As we got within about 20 feet, I could see he was using a track gauge, a tool for checking if the rails were the right distance apart. "Sir, you need to stop what you're doing," I said, louder this time. That's when the man turned around. It was me. Exact same face, same work clothes, same everything. But his eyes were different. Flat and empty, like looking into a dark well. Tommy made a choking sound and stumbled backward. I just stood there, staring at myself. The other me, my double, smiled with my own mouth and said in my own voice, "Almost done here, Gus. Just checking the gauge. Got to keep the rails true." Then he turned back to his work like nothing had happened. I grabbed Tommy's arm and we ran. Just turned around and ran like scared kids, our flashlights bouncing crazy shadows on the tunnel walls. Behind us, I could hear the steady tap-tap-tap of the track gauge, keeping perfect time. We didn't stop until we reached daylight. Tommy was pale as a sheet, and I felt like I was going to throw up. "What the hell was that?" Tommy gasped. I didn't have an answer. How do you explain seeing yourself in a place you've never been, doing work that's impossible? Jake and Bill came out of the side tunnel a few minutes later. They looked shaken too. "We saw something weird," Jake said. "Looked like somebody working on the tracks, but when we got close, he just wasn't there anymore." "What did he look like?" I asked. "Like you, Gus. Exactly like you." We packed up our gear and got out of there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those empty eyes and the way my double had smiled. It was my smile, but it wasn't. Like someone wearing my face who didn't know how faces were supposed to work. The next day, Mills called me again. More hiker complaints. People were reporting seeing work crews in all the tunnels now, not just 7, and they all looked the same. Exact copies of the trail maintenance team. "I'm starting to think we got trespassers with a sick sense of humor," Mills said. "Some kind of prank. You know anything about people who might want to mess with us?" I didn't tell him what we'd really seen. Mills was a practical man who believed in practical problems with practical solutions. He wouldn't believe that the tunnels were full of impossible people doing impossible work. But I had to know what was going on. That evening, I went back to Tunnel 7 alone. I know it was stupid, but I had to see if my double was still there. The tunnel was quiet when I entered. No sound of work, no whistling, just my footsteps and my breathing. I walked all the way to where we'd seen the other me, and found something that made my blood run cold. There was a work report lying on the track. Official Cherokee National Forest paperwork, filled out in my own handwriting. According to the report, I had completed track maintenance on Tunnel 7 the night before, working from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. But I'd been home asleep at that time. I knew I had been, because I'd watched the late news and gone to bed at 10:30, like always. The signature at the bottom was perfect. Exactly how I signed my name. But I didn't remember writing it. I folded up the report and put it in my pocket. Walking back toward the entrance, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. When I walked fast, they walked fast. When I slowed down, they slowed down. I turned around and shined my light back into the tunnel. Nothing there. But the moment I started walking again, I heard them, my own footsteps, echoing just a second behind my real ones. I ran the last 100 yards to daylight and didn't look back. That night, I called my brother's widow down in Alabama. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, someone real. "Gus, you sound terrible," she said. "What's wrong? How do you tell someone that you're seeing copies of yourself? That something in those old tunnels is wearing your face and doing your job?" "Just work stuff," I said. "Been having some strange days." "You know," she said, "you always did work too hard. Ever since Johnny died, you've been pushing yourself like you got something to prove. Maybe you should take some time off." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about my brother. Johnny had been working on a bridge repair when a freight train came around a blind curve. He never had a chance. The company said it was human error. Johnny should have posted a lookout. But Johnny was careful. He knew railroad safety better than anyone. Something had gone wrong that day. Something that didn't make sense. Just like what was happening in the tunnels. I pulled out the work report I'd found and looked at it again. My handwriting, my signature, my employee number. But in the corner, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A date, the 15th of December 1923. The same day, 3 workers died in the tunnel collapse. The next morning, I found Tommy sitting in his truck outside the ranger station, staring at his hands. "Tommy, you okay?" He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Gus, I think I'm losing my mind. I went home last night and my wife said I'd already been there. She said, I came home at 5:30, ate dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. But I was with you in the tunnels until 7. My stomach dropped. What did your wife say when you got home the second time?" "That's the thing. She didn't see me come in. I used my key and went straight to the garage. She thought I'd been there the whole time. But this morning, she asked me why I left my work clothes in the washing machine. Said they smelled like coal smoke and machine oil. I drove to my house and checked my own laundry. Sure enough, there was a set of work clothes in my washing machine that I didn't remember putting there. They were my clothes, right size, same stains I always get. But they reeked of old locomotives and underground air. On the kitchen table, I found another work report. This one said I'd spent the previous night doing track maintenance in Tunnel 3. Again, signed in my handwriting with yesterday's date. But this report was different. At the bottom, in the same handwriting, someone had written, "Shift ends at dawn. Report to foreman. Work must be completed." I called Mills and told him I was taking a sick day. Then I drove to the county library and asked to see old newspaper records from the 1922nd. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was happy to help. "Doing research on the railroad, Gus? That's wonderful. Not many people remember the old days." She brought me stacks of yellowed newspapers from 1923. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Asterisk, asterisk, tunnel collapse, kills 3 railroad workers, asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, December 15, 1923. Asterisk, asterisk. 3 men died yesterday evening when a tunnel under construction on the new Cherokee Mountain Line collapsed without warning. The victims were Augustus Beaumont, 48, track foreman, Thomas Millfield, 34, rail layer, and William Jacobson, 29, tunnel specialist. Asterisk, asterisk. According to survivors, the 3 men had remained in Tunnel 7 after the regular crew finished work, determined to complete the track laying before winter weather made further progress impossible. They were last seen at approximately 10 p.m., working by lantern light, asterisk. Asterisk, they were good workers, dedicated to finishing the job, said Railroad Supervisor Harold Mills. They knew that track had to be completed before the ground froze. Asterisk, asterisk. Recovery efforts are ongoing, but company officials say the tunnel is too unstable to continue excavation safely. Asterisk. I read the article 3 times before it sank in. Augustus Beaumont, close enough to Augustus Beauregard Tunnelwood, Thomas Millfield, Tommy, William Jacobson, Bill. Even the supervisor's name was Mills. Just like my boss. And they'd died trying to finish work in Tunnel 7, the same tunnel where I'd met my double. Mrs. Henderson noticed me staring at the paper. Terrible story, isn't it? My grandfather knew Augustus Beaumont. Said he was the kind of man who'd work himself to death before he'd leave a job unfinished. What happened to the tunnel after the collapse? Oh, they sealed it up for a while. But during the Depression, some work crews went back in there. They said they could hear hammering and voices, like someone was still working. Of course, nobody believed them. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and drove home to think. 3 workers had died in 1923, trying to finish laying track in Tunnel 7. Now, something wearing the faces of me and my crew was doing the same work, night after night. That evening, my phone rang. It was Bill. "Gus, something's wrong." My neighbor called and said he saw me working in my yard at midnight last night, but I was asleep, and this morning, I found my tool shed cleaned out and reorganized. All my railroad tools are missing. Your railroad tools? Yeah, the old ones my grandfather left me. He used to work for the railroad back in the 20s. Track hammer, rail tongs, spike maul, all the old-fashioned stuff. It's gone. I hung up and checked my own garage. My grandfather's railroad tools were missing too, tools I hadn't touched in years. But on my workbench, I found a note in my own handwriting. Tools needed for night shift. Will return when work is complete. Something was using us. Using our faces, our voices, our tools. But for what? I had to go back to the tunnels. I knew it was dangerous, but I needed answers. This time, I brought a camera and a tape recorder. If I was going crazy, at least I'd have proof. Tunnel 7 was busy when I arrived. I could hear the sounds of work echoing from deep inside, hammering, scraping, voices calling to each other. But when I got close enough to see, there was nobody there. Just fresh work on the tracks and the smell of coal smoke. I set up my camera and recorder where I'd seen my double before. Then I waited. Around midnight, they came. My whole crew, exact copies down to the last detail. But their movements were wrong, too precise, too mechanical. Like machines wearing human faces. My double saw me first. He smiled that empty smile and waved. "You're early for your shift, Gus. We got a lot of work to finish before dawn." "I'm not on shift," I said. "I don't work nights." He tilted his head like he didn't understand. "Course you do. Got to finish the track before winter. Foreman's orders." The other doubles, Tommy, Bill, and Jake, kept working like I wasn't there. They moved old railroad equipment that should have weighed tons like it was made of paper. They laid track with impossible speed, never stopping to rest or drink water. "What are you?" I asked. My double straightened up from his work. "We're the crew, Gus. Same as always. Been working this tunnel since 1923. Almost done now. Just got to finish this last section before the deadline." The deadline was 65 years ago. The railroad gave up on this tunnel. His smile faded. "Can't give up. Work's got to be finished. That's what we do. That's all we do." That's when I understood. These weren't ghosts exactly. They were echoes. The last moments of those three workers, played over and over. They'd been so focused on finishing their work that even death couldn't stop them. And somehow, they were pulling us into their endless shift. "You're dead," I said. "You died in 1923. All four doubles stopped working and looked at me. Their faces were still ours, but their eyes were black holes. "We're not dead," my double said. "We're working. We got a job to finish." They started walking toward me, moving in perfect step like soldiers. I grabbed my camera and recorder and ran for the entrance. Behind me, I could hear them calling, "Don't leave, Gus. Shift's not over. Work's gotta be finished." I made it to my truck and drove home with shaking hands. The camera had captured nothing but darkness, and the tape recorder was full of static. But I knew what I'd seen. The next morning, Jake didn't show up for work. His wife called and said he'd left for an early shift at 4 a.m., but there was no early shift scheduled. When we went to look for him, we found his truck parked at Tunnel 7. Inside the tunnel, we found Jake, the real Jake. He was unconscious but breathing, lying on the track about 50 yards in. We got him to the hospital, but he couldn't remember anything after going to bed the night before. "It's like he was sleepwalking," the doctor said. "But he's got calluses on his hands from heavy labor, fresh ones, like he's been doing railroad work for weeks." That's when I knew we were in real trouble. The doubles weren't just copying us anymore. They were replacing us. I called an emergency meeting with Mills, Tommy, and Bill. Jake was still in the hospital, and his wife said he kept talking in his sleep about finishing the track before winter. "Gentlemen, we got a situation," I said, "and you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you." I laid out everything. The doubles, the 1,923 accident, the missing tools, the work reports. Mills listened with the patient expression he used for crazy hikers who claimed they'd seen Bigfoot. "Gus, I think you're under a lot of stress," he said finally. "Maybe you should check your laundry," I interrupted. "All of you. Check your washing machines." They did. They all found clothes they didn't remember washing, all smelling like coal smoke and machine oil. They all found work reports they didn't remember filling out. And they all found notes in their own handwriting about night shifts and deadlines. "This is impossible," Bill whispered. "No," I said. "This is what happens when the dead don't know they're dead." I told them my theory. The three workers who died in 1923 had been so focused on finishing their job that their spirits got stuck in a loop, endlessly trying to complete the track. But spirits can't do physical work alone. They need living people to work through. "They're using us," I said. "Taking our faces, our voices, our bodies while we sleep. And every night, they get stronger. Pretty soon, they won't need us asleep anymore." Mills was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "What do you think we should do?" "I think we need to help them finish their work. It's the only way to set them free." Tommy laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You want us to go back into that tunnel? After what happened to Jake?" "Jake's in the hospital because he went alone," I said. "If we go together, stay awake, stay aware of who we are, maybe we can break the loop." It was a crazy plan, but it was the only plan we had. That evening, the four of us went to Tunnel 7 with every light we could carry. We brought tools, coffee, and a determination to end this thing once and for all. The tunnel was quiet when we entered. No sounds of work, no doubles, just the echo of our footsteps and the beam of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We walked to where the fresh track work ended. There was maybe 50 yards of old, broken rail left to fix. 65 years of work, and they'd almost finished. "This is it," I said. "This is what they've been trying to complete." We started working. Real work, with real tools, fixing the track the way it should have been done in 1923. It was hard labor, and we were all older men, but something about it felt right. Around midnight, they appeared. Our doubles, standing just outside the circle of our work lights. They watched us with their empty eyes, but they didn't interfere. "Why aren't they stopping us?" Bill asked. "Because we're doing their job," I said. "We're finishing what they started." As we worked, I could feel something changing in the tunnel. The air got warmer, and the oppressive feeling that had always made my skin crawl started to fade. The doubles moved closer, but they looked different now. Less mechanical, more human. My double spoke, and for the first time, his voice sounded sad instead of empty. "Thank you," he said. "We've been trying so long to finish, so very long." "Why couldn't you stop?" I asked. "Why couldn't you rest?" Foreman said the work had to be done before winter. Said jobs were scarce, and good workers don't leave things undone. We promised we'd finish, no matter what. I understood. These men had died trying to keep a promise, and their spirits couldn't rest until that promise was kept. For 65 years, they'd been trapped by their own sense of duty. We worked through the night. As dawn approached, we laid the final rail and drove the last spike. The track was complete, straight and true, from one end of the tunnel to the other. The moment that last spike hit home, everything changed. The doubles smiled, real smiles this time, full of relief and gratitude. "Shift's over," my double said. "Work's done. Time to go home." They started walking toward the back of the tunnel, fading with each step. Just before they disappeared completely, my double turned back. "Take care of this place, Gus. It's good work. Important work." Then they were gone, and the tunnel was just a tunnel again, old and quiet and peaceful. We found Mills at the tunnel entrance when we came out. He'd been worried when we didn't check in, so he'd come looking for us. But the Mills we found wasn't quite right. His eyes were too flat, his smile too empty. "Good work, boys," he said in a voice that sounded like Mills but wasn't. "But there's more track needs fixing. Tunnel 3's got problems. Why don't you head over there?" I looked at Tommy and Bill. They saw it too. Whatever had been controlling the railroad workers was trying to start over with our supervisor. "No," I said firmly. "The work's done. Time to go home." The false Mills tilted his head. "But there's always more work, always more track to lay." "Not for us," I said. "Our shift is over." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, anger, then resignation. Mills shook his head like he was waking up from a dream. "What am I doing here?" he asked. "How did I get here?" We helped him back to his truck and followed him home. I don't think he ever remembered coming to the tunnel that morning. It's been 6 months since that night in Tunnel 7. The strange incidents stopped completely. No more doubles, no more impossible work reports, no missing tools. The tunnels are quiet now, just old railroad artifacts slowly being reclaimed by the mountain. Jake recovered completely, with no memory of his experience. We never told him the full story. Just said he'd been sleepwalking and got lost. Sometimes, though, I catch him staring at the tunnel entrances with a thoughtful expression, like he's trying to remember something important. I still do my rounds through the old railroad territory, checking trails and keeping hikers safe. But now I do it with a deeper understanding of what this place really is. It's not just abandoned infrastructure. It's a monument to working people who cared so much about doing their jobs right that they couldn't let go, even in death. I started researching other old railroad sites in Appalachia, and what I found doesn't surprise me anymore. Lots of stories about ghost workers, phantom trains, voices in abandoned tunnels. Most people dismiss them as folklore, but I know better now. There are places where the living world and the world of the dead overlap, where strong emotions and unfinished business create echoes that can last for generations. The tunnels under Cherokee National Forest were one of those places. But not anymore. The track through Tunnel 7 is complete now, and the workers who died building it have finally gone home. Sometimes, when I'm checking that tunnel, I think I can hear something like contentment in the silence, the peace that comes after a job well done. I've thought about retiring, maybe moving somewhere warmer where the mountains don't hold so many secrets. But this is my territory now, my responsibility. Good workers don't leave things undone, and there's always another trail that needs maintaining, another bridge that needs inspecting. Besides, I understand now that some jobs are bigger than just the work itself. Sometimes you're not just fixing trails or laying track, you're taking care of the people who came before you, making sure their sacrifices aren't forgotten. The The railroad workers who died in 1923 weren't just building a tunnel, they were trying to connect isolated mountain communities, to bring progress and opportunity to places that had been forgotten by the outside world. That's work worth finishing, work worth remembering. So I keep making my rounds, keeping the trail safe, and telling the story to anyone who'll listen. Not the ghost story version, the real story, about working people who cared so much about their jobs that death couldn't stop them from trying to finish what they'd started. That's a kind of dedication you don't see much anymore. Maybe that's something we've lost in our modern world. The understanding that some work is bigger than ourselves, that the things we build and maintain will outlast us and matter to people we'll never meet. The tunnels are quiet now, but they're not empty. They're full of history, full of the sweat and effort of people who believed their work mattered. And maybe, late at night when the wind blows through the mountain passes, you can still hear an echo of their pride. I'll keep listening. It's part of the job. My name is Mordecai Thaddeus Mistwalker, and I've been a park ranger in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest for 16 years. I know that sounds like a made-up name, but it's what my parents gave me. The kids in school used to tease me about it until I started going by Morty. Now, most folks just call me Ranger Mistwalker. I wasn't always a ranger. Got my degree in meteorology from West Virginia University back in 1970. Spent a few years working for the National Weather Service. But I got tired of sitting behind a desk, watching weather patterns on computer screens. I wanted to be out there, in the mountains, feeling the wind and rain myself. So, in 1973, I took a job with the Forest Service. Best decision I ever made, even after what happened. My specialty is weather station maintenance and atmospheric research. The mountains here create their own weather. Fog rolls up from the valleys, gets trapped between the ridges, sometimes sits there for days. We've got monitoring stations scattered throughout the hollows, places where the mist never really goes away. I check the equipment, collect data, make sure everything's working right. For 16 years, I thought I understood every kind of fog formation these mountains could throw at me. Radiation fog on clear nights, upslope fog when moist air hits the ridges, evaporation fog rising from the streams. I had names for all of it, scientific explanations that made perfect sense. The old-timers around here, they've got different names. They talk about fog that takes people whole, about something they call the cloud walkers. Native legends going back hundreds of years. I always figured these were just stories. Ways for mountain folk to explain why hikers sometimes get lost and never found. The wilderness can be dangerous enough without adding ghosts to the mix. March of 1989 was when everything changed. Spring fog season was just starting, and we were getting temperature inversions almost daily. That's when warm air sits on top of cold air, trapping moisture in the valleys. Perfect conditions for the thick fog that makes these mountains famous. I was making my rounds, checking Station 7 up in Fog Hollow. That's what we call the deepest part of the valley, where the mist never really burns off, not even in summer. The trail up there is treacherous on a good day. When the fog rolls in, you can't see your hand in front of your face. The hike takes about 2 hours from the ranger station, following an old logging road that switchbacks up the mountain. The trees get thicker as you climb, ancient hemlocks and white pines that block out most of the sky. Even on clear days, it's dim under that canopy. When the fog comes, it's like walking into a white cave. I'd made this trip dozens of times, could probably do it blindfolded. But that morning, something felt different. The air was too still, too quiet. Usually you hear birds, squirrels rustling through the leaves, water trickling over rocks. But as I got closer to the hollow, all that stopped. Just silence, thick as cotton in my ears. The fog started about a quarter mile from the station. At first, just wisps curling around the tree trunks. Then it got thicker, until I could barely make out the trail markers. My equipment readings were all normal, temperature steady at 42 degrees, humidity at 90%, light wind from the southwest. Everything looked right on paper, but it didn't feel right. I've been in fog thousands of times. It's just water droplets suspended in air, nothing more mysterious than a cloud touching the ground. But this fog felt aware, like it was watching me, waiting for something. Every step I took echoed wrong, like the sound was coming from behind me instead of ahead. By the time I reached Station 7, I couldn't see more than 3 feet in any direction. The weather station looked like a ghost ship floating in white space. Solar panels, wind gauge, temperature sensors, all the familiar equipment, but somehow strange in the thick mist. I checked the data logger first. That's when I saw the first impossible reading. According to the instruments, the barometric pressure had dropped to 28.5 inches of mercury. That's hurricane-level low pressure. But we were nowhere near any storm system. The Weather Service had predicted clear skies all week. I tapped the gauge, thinking it was broken, but the reading stayed the same. Temperature was another problem. The digital thermometer showed 42 degrees, just like my handheld unit. But the old mercury thermometer attached to the station showed 38 degrees. 4 degrees difference between instruments sitting 3 feet apart. That doesn't happen with properly calibrated equipment. And then there was the humidity reading, 110%. That's not possible. Air can't hold more moisture than air can hold. It's like saying water is wetter than wet. But there it was, glowing green on the digital display. 110%. I started checking all the connections, making sure nothing was loose or corroded. The fog was so thick now I had to feel my way around the station with my hands. That's when I heard the voice. "Morty, you up there?" I froze. Nobody was supposed to be in the hollow. It's restricted access, too dangerous for casual hikers. And whoever was calling knew my nickname. "Hello?" I called back. "Who's there?" The fog swallowed my voice like it was eating the sound. No echo, no reply. Just that suffocating silence. I waited, listening. Nothing but my own heartbeat and the soft drip of moisture from the trees. Maybe I'd imagined it. Fog can play tricks on your hearing, make you think you're hearing voices when it's just wind through the leaves. But there wasn't any wind. I finished my equipment check as fast as I could. Something about that fog made my skin crawl. It wasn't just thick, it was wrong somehow. Too white, too still, too quiet, like being wrapped in wet cotton. As I packed up my tools, I heard the voice again. Closer this time. "Morty, where are you? I can't see anything." My blood went cold. I knew that voice. It was Danny Kowalski, a local hiker who'd gone missing 3 weeks earlier. Search and Rescue had spent a week looking for him before calling it off. We figured he'd fallen into a ravine somewhere, maybe got turned around and died of exposure. "Danny?" I called out. "Danny, is that you?" "I'm lost, Morty. Been walking for hours. This fog won't lift." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. To my left, then my right, then somewhere above me in the trees. I pulled out my flashlight, but the beam just bounced off the white wall of mist. "Keep talking, Danny. I'll find you." I started moving toward where I thought the voice was coming from. The trail disappeared completely in the fog. I had to feel my way from tree to tree, using the trunks as guideposts. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in a carpet of wet leaves that muffled every step. "I can't find the trail," Danny's voice said. "Everything looks the same. Just white, everywhere." "Stay where you are," I told him. "Don't move. I'm coming to you." But as I stumbled through the fog, the voice kept shifting position. Sometimes it sounded like it was just ahead of me. Then it would come from behind, or off to one side. Like Danny was walking in circles around me, always just out of sight. After 20 minutes of this, I stopped. Something was very wrong. Even in thick fog, you can usually hear footsteps, breathing, the rustle of clothes as someone moves. But I heard nothing except Danny's voice, floating in the white void like it was coming through a radio. "Danny, stand still and shout as loud as you can. I need to get a fix on your position." Silence. Then very softly, "I don't think I can do that, Morty." The voice was different now, flatter, like someone talking in their sleep. And there was something else underneath it, a sound like wind through a cave, or maybe dozens of people whispering at once. "Why not?" I asked, though every instinct was telling me to run. "Because I'm not really here." The fog around me started to move, not drifting like normal fog, but shifting in patterns, forming shapes. For just a moment, I saw something that looked like a face floating in the mist. Danny's face. But wrong somehow. Too pale, eyes too wide, mouth moving without making sound. Then it was gone, and I was alone again in the white silence. I backed toward where I thought the weather station was, feeling behind me with my hands. The fog seemed to follow, pressing closer, like it was trying to wrap around me. My breathing got shallow. The air felt thick, hard to pull into my lungs. That's when I heard the other voices. "Help me," a woman's voice, scared and tired. "I've been walking for days." "Mom? Mom, where are you?" A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. "Anyone out there? Please, I can't find my car." An older man, voice shaking with fear. All around me, floating in the fog like sounds from a dream. Voices of people who'd gone missing in these mountains over the years. People I'd helped search for, people we'd never found. I ran. Didn't matter that I couldn't see where I was going. Didn't matter that I might trip over a root or walk off a cliff. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my jacket, fog flowing around me like water. Behind me, the voices followed. "Don't leave us, Morty. We're so cold. The fog won't let us go." I don't know how I found the trail. Maybe luck, maybe some ranger instinct I'd developed over the years. But suddenly I was on solid ground, running downhill as fast as my legs would carry me. The fog thinned as I descended, until I could see trees again, then patches of sky. By the time I reached the ranger station, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I sat on the porch for 10 minutes, just breathing normal air, looking at normal trees under a normal blue sky. Inside, I called my supervisor, Chuck Morrison. Told him I'd had equipment problems at Station 7, that some of the readings were impossible, didn't mention the voices. Chuck would have thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. That afternoon, I drove over to the county library and spent hours reading old newspapers, missing persons reports going back 50 years. Hikers, hunters, kids who wandered off from camping trips, most were never found. The mountains are full of places where a body could disappear forever. But there were patterns I'd never noticed before. Most of the disappearances happened in spring and fall, during fog season. And they were clustered around the same areas: Fog Hollow, Misty Ridge, the valleys where the mist lingered longest. One article from 1967 caught my attention. A search and rescue volunteer named Bill Henderson had been leading a team looking for a missing teenager. According to his report, they'd been following the boy's tracks when a sudden fog bank rolled in. Henderson claimed he heard the teenager calling for help, but when they tried to follow the voice, it led them deeper into the wilderness instead of toward safety. The boy was never found, but Henderson was so shaken by the experience that he quit the search team and moved away from the area. The newspaper quoted him as saying, "That wasn't no natural fog. Something lives in it, and it's hungry." I closed the newspaper with shaking hands. 60 years of missing people, 60 years of fog that didn't behave like fog should, and now it knew my name. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices calling from the fog. Danny Kowalski, asking for help. The woman who'd been walking for days, the child looking for his mother. The next morning, I called Dr. Sarah Vance at the university. She was an atmospheric scientist I'd worked with before, someone who specialized in unusual weather patterns. If anyone could explain what I'd experienced, it was her. "I need you to look at some atmospheric data," I told her. "There's something strange happening in Fog Hollow." "Strange how?" Dr. Vance sounded interested. She loved a good scientific mystery. Impossible barometric readings, temperature variations that don't make sense. Humidity levels over 100%. There was a pause. "That's not possible, Morty. Your equipment must be malfunctioning." That's what I thought, but I checked everything twice. "The readings are real. I'll be up tomorrow," she said. "This I have to see." Dr. Vance arrived the next afternoon with a truck full of portable weather monitoring equipment. She was a small woman in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. We'd worked together on several research projects over the years. If anyone could figure out what was happening in that hollow, it was her. We loaded up my Jeep and headed for the mountains. It was a clear day, no fog in sight, perfect conditions for scientific observation. "Tell me exactly what you experienced, Doctor," Vance said as we drove up the winding mountain road. I told her about the impossible readings, the strange silence, the way the fog felt different somehow. I didn't mention the voices. Not yet. We parked at the trailhead and hiked up to Station 7. In the daylight, with clear skies overhead, everything looked normal. The weather station stood in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines. Birds sang in the trees. A creek babbled somewhere nearby. Dr. Vance set up her equipment while I checked the regular instruments. Everything read normal. Temperature, 58 degrees. Humidity, 40%. Barometric pressure, 30.15 inches. Exactly what you'd expect for a spring afternoon in the mountains. I don't see any anomalies, Dr. Vance said, frowning at her portable weather station. All readings are within normal parameters. I felt stupid. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the fog had just gotten to me, made me paranoid. Then the temperature started dropping. It happened fast. In the space of 5 minutes, the air went from 58 degrees to 45. Then 40. Then 35. Our breath started showing in little white puffs. That's not normal, Dr. Vance muttered, watching her instruments. The sun's still shining. There's no weather system moving in. The fog came next. Just wisps at first, curling up from the hollow below. But it moved wrong, flowing uphill against the wind, pooling in places it shouldn't pool. Within minutes, thick white mist surrounded us. Look at this, Dr. Vance called out, her voice muffled by the fog. The barometric pressure just dropped 6 inches in 2 minutes. That's impossible. I couldn't see her anymore, even though she was only 10 feet away. The fog was thicker than anything I'd ever experienced, like being buried in white sand. Sarah, where are you? Over here, by the instruments. But her voice came from the wrong direction. I turned toward the sound and took a step, then another. My foot hit something solid, a tree. But that was wrong. There weren't any trees between the weather station and Dr. Vance's equipment. I knew this clearing like the back of my hand. Sarah, I'm right here. But now her voice came from behind me. Where did you go? I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My altimeter showed 3 different elevations in the space of 30 seconds. 2,800 feet, then 3,200, then 1,900. Like the ground itself was shifting under my feet. That's when I heard the new voice. Dr. Vance, is that you? A man's voice, unfamiliar but friendly. Thank God, I've been lost for hours. Who's there? Dr. Vance called out. My name's Robert Chen. I'm a graduate student from the university. I was collecting soil samples when this fog rolled in. I felt cold all over. Dr. Vance hadn't told anyone else about this trip, and no graduate students were authorized to be in this restricted area. Stay where you are, I shouted. Don't move toward that voice. Why not? Dr. Vance asked. If someone's lost, because Robert Chen disappeared in these mountains 2 years ago. His body was never found. Silence. Then Dr. Vance's voice, very small. Oh my God. The fog started moving faster, swirling in patterns that made no sense. And with it came more voices. Dozens of them. All the missing people from my newspaper research, calling out for help, begging to be rescued. I grabbed Dr. Vance's arm and pulled her away from the voices, toward where I thought the trail might be. We stumbled through the fog for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The voices followed us, always just out of sight, always leading us away from safety. This way, a child's voice said. I found the path. No, an old woman called out. The trail's over here. You're both wrong, said a man who sounded like my dead father. Follow me. Dr. Vance was shaking. This isn't possible. Fog can't do this. It's just water vapor. But I was starting to understand. This wasn't normal fog. This was something else entirely. Something that collected people, absorbed them somehow, used their voices to lure others into the white void. We found the real trail by accident, following the sound of running water to the creek that paralleled the path. The fog thinned as we descended, until we could see the forest again, then patches of blue sky. By the time we reached the jeep, Dr. Vance was as white as the mist we'd escaped. She didn't say a word during the drive back to town, just sat there, staring at her instruments, trying to make sense of readings that defied everything she knew about atmospheric science. That night, she called me from her hotel. I analyzed the air samples I collected, she said, her voice shaky. There are microscopic crystalline structures in that fog, Morty. Geometric patterns I've never seen before. They're not ice crystals, and they're not any natural formation I can identify. What are you saying? I'm saying that fog isn't made of water. It's made of something else. something that shouldn't exist. 2 days later, Dr. Vance's assistant found her standing in the hotel parking lot at 3 in the morning. Her eyes were open, but she didn't respond to her name. She wasn't breathing. Her heart had stopped, but her body was still warm, like she'd just died. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with her. No heart attack, no stroke, no signs of disease or injury. They said it was like her consciousness had simply left. I knew better. The fog had found her, even 50 miles away from the mountains. It had taken what it wanted, leaving behind an empty shell. And now it was coming for me. 3 nights after Dr. Vance's death, the fog came to my house. I live in a small cabin, about 5 miles from the ranger station, tucked back in the trees where the tourists can't find me. It's my sanctuary, the place where I can forget about the mountains and their mysteries. Or at least, it used to be. I was sitting on my porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset, when I noticed the mist starting to rise from the valley below. That was normal enough. Fog forms every evening in the hollows, especially this time of year. But this fog was different. It moved too purposefully, flowing uphill like water in reverse. Within minutes, it had surrounded my cabin, thick, white, impenetrable. The kind of fog that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. "Hello, Morty." "Hello, Morty." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Not any single person, but dozens of voices speaking in unison. All the people who'd vanished in the mountains over the years, their words blending into something that wasn't quite human anymore. I stood up slowly, my coffee mug trembling in my hands. "What do you want?" "We want to show you something. Something wonderful." The fog pressed closer to the porch, and I could see shapes moving in it. Faces, dozens of them, floating just beneath the surface of the mist like bodies under ice. Men, women, children. All the missing hikers and hunters, all the people who'd gotten lost in the fog and never came home, but they weren't dead. Their eyes tracked my movement, their mouths opened and closed soundlessly. They were trapped, suspended in that white void, conscious but unable to escape. "They're safe with us," the collective voice said. "No more cold, no more hunger, no more fear. Just peace, forever and always." "You're killing them," I said. "We're preserving them. Every memory, every experience, every moment of their lives, they live on within us, part of something greater than they ever imagined." The fog flowed onto my porch, and I backed toward the door. The air temperature was dropping fast. I could see my breath now, little puffs of white that were quickly absorbed by the mist. "Dr. Vance figured it out before we collected her," the voices said. "We're not weather, Morty. We're not a natural phenomenon. We're alive, ancient. We've been feeding on human consciousness for thousands of years." More faces appeared in the fog. Danny Kowalski, his features peaceful but empty. Robert Chen, the graduate student who disappeared 2 years ago. Dr. Vance, her scientific curiosity replaced by blank acceptance. The Native Americans knew about us. They called us the Cloud Walkers, the spirits that dwelt between earth and sky. Your people forgot the old warnings, wandered into our domain unprepared. I reached the cabin door and fumbled for the handle. The fog was seeping through the screens now, curling under the door, reaching for me with tendrils of white mist. Every person we absorb makes us stronger, smarter. We learn their knowledge, their skills. Dr. Vance taught us so much about your modern science. From you, we could learn the patterns of these mountains, the movements of your fellow rangers. Think how many more we could collect with that knowledge. Inside the cabin, I grabbed my weather radio and started scanning frequencies. Most of the channels were dead, filled with static. But on one frequency, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices, hundreds of them, all the people the fog had taken, speaking in unison, sharing their consciousness like a vast, connected mind. They were planning something, expanding their territory beyond the isolated hollows, moving into populated areas where they could harvest more minds. "You can't run from weather, Morty," the collective voice said. The fog was pouring through the windows now, despite the fact that they were closed. "We're everywhere the mist touches. Every valley, every mountain, every cool morning when the conditions are right." I ran to my equipment closet and pulled out the emergency weather kit, portable barometer, wind gauge, temperature sensors, and most importantly, the atmospheric ionizer I'd borrowed from the Weather Service years ago and never returned. The ionizer was designed to seed clouds with electrical charges, helping to disperse fog at airports during low visibility conditions. I'd never used it, but I understood the principle. Electrical charges could disrupt the crystalline structures Dr. Vance had found in the fog samples. Joining us is inevitable, the voices said as fog filled the cabin. Why struggle against the natural order? Your consciousness will live forever as part of our collective. You'll know everything we know, see through 1,000 eyes. The faces in the fog pressed closer. I could almost touch them now, almost hear their individual voices underneath the collective whisper. Some looked peaceful, accepting their fate. Others seemed to be silently screaming. I switched on the ionizer and pointed it at the thickest concentration of fog. The machine hummed to life, generating a field of charged particles that made the air itself seem to crackle with energy. The effect was immediate. The fog recoiled like it had been burned, the faces within it contorting in what might have been pain or surprise. For a moment, the collective voice faltered, becoming a discordant mess of individual cries. Impossible, they said, but their unity was breaking. You cannot, we are eternal. The mist is our domain. I cranked the ionizer to maximum power. The electrical field filled the cabin, making my hair stand on end. The fog began to dissipate, breaking apart into wisps and tendrils that fled toward the windows. But I knew this was only temporary. The ionizer was a portable unit, powered by batteries that wouldn't last long. And even if I could keep it running, the fog could simply wait me out, surrounding my cabin until I had to sleep or eat or venture outside. As the mist retreated, I heard one final message from the collective. This isn't over, Morty Mistwalker. We know where you live now. We know where all your people live. The fog comes every night. Then they were gone, leaving behind only the normal evening mist and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I spent the rest of the night setting up early warning systems around my cabin and calling in favors from old contacts at the weather service. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't much, but it might save a few lives. 3 years have passed since my encounter with what I've come to think of as the Fog Hollow Collector. I'm still a ranger, still checking weather stations in the mountains of West Virginia. But everything is different now. I've set up an unofficial warning network with other rangers throughout the Appalachian mountain system. When atmospheric conditions are right for the supernatural fog, sudden temperature drops, impossible humidity readings, barometric pressure changes that don't match any known weather patterns, we sound the alarm. Close trails, evacuate campers, keep people away from the valleys where the mist lingers longest. The official reports list these as atmospheric anomaly precautions. The bureaucrats in Charleston think I'm overly cautious about weather safety. They don't need to know the truth. They wouldn't believe it anyway. I've also been working with a small group of atmospheric scientists who are studying similar phenomena in other mountain ranges. Dr. Vance wasn't the first researcher to encounter impossible fog formations. There are reports from the Smoky Mountains, the Cascades, even the Alps, ancient predators that evolved to mimic weather patterns, feeding on human consciousness in isolated places where their activities could go unnoticed for centuries. We call ourselves the Clear Air Society. Half joking, half serious. We share information, develop countermeasures, and try to protect people from threats that science doesn't officially recognize. It's not much, but it's something. The ionization technique works, but only temporarily. The entities that create these fog formations are old and adaptable. They've learned to avoid areas with strong electrical fields, to hunt only when the atmospheric conditions make electronic countermeasures ineffective. Sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting a war I can't win. There are so many isolated valleys in these mountains, so many places where the mist can gather and hunt, and with each person they absorb, the collective grows stronger, smarter, more dangerous. But I keep doing the work anyway. Because every warning I send out, every trail I close, every family I evacuate from a campground might save someone from ending up as another face in the fog. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. She'd found a missing hiker standing in a meadow, alive but unresponsive. The man's body was fine, but his mind was gone. Just like Dr. Vance. The fog had tried to take him, but been interrupted before the process was complete, leaving behind an empty shell. It's spreading, getting bolder, testing new territories, new hunting strategies. I still live in my cabin in the mountains, still make my rounds to the weather stations, though I never go to Fog Hollow anymore. Station 7 has been officially decommissioned due to ongoing equipment malfunctions. The real reason is that anyone who ventures into that particular valley alone never comes back the same. Sometimes, on clear nights, I stand on my porch and look up at the stars. The mountains stretch out below me in dark ridges and shadows, beautiful and peaceful. During those moments, I can almost forget about the ancient things that hunt in the mist. But when morning comes and I see fog rising from the valleys, I remember. And I check my ionizer batteries, scan the weather frequencies, and prepare for another day of protecting people from a threat they don't know exists. The fog remembers me too. Sometimes I hear my name whispered in the mist that forms around my cabin on cool evenings. It's waiting for me to make a mistake, to venture out unprepared, to give it another chance at adding my consciousness to its collection. So far, I've been lucky. But luck doesn't last forever in these mountains. The fog is patient. It has all the time in the world, and it never forgets a face.